We're good to go, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Jared. Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. The October 2025 Marine Fish Advisory Commission meeting is now in session. Introductions and announcements. I have none other than we need to take a roll call vote on attendance, presumably because we're doing this digitally or over the air as opposed to in person. So, Jared?
That's correct, Mr. Chair. I'll call the roll. Bill Amaru?
Yes. Here.
Bill Doyle?
Here.
Chris McGuire?
Here.
Eric Nelson?
Here.
Ray Jarvis?
Here.
Raymond Kane?
Here.
Shelley Edmondson?
Here.
Suki Sawyer?
Here.
We have full attendance today, Mr. Chair. Turn it back to you.
Thank you, and I would like to thank all the commission members for giving us full attendance. It's refreshing to have an entire commission, all the commission members at the meetings. I'd like to review the October 2025 business meeting agenda. Any thoughts?
Not seeing any hands raised, Mr. Chair. We can proceed to the September minutes.
Okay, September minutes. Are there any edits to the September minutes?
Not seeing any hands raised. We need to move to a motion and a roll call vote to accept.
Need a motion, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen.
I'll make the motion, Ray.
Thank you, Shelley. Who's seconding?
Second, Chris.
Thank you, Chris. Is
Yeah.
anybody opposed?
It has to be roll
Oh,
call.
I'm sorry, Jared.
Bill Amaru?
Yes.
Bill Doyle?
Yes.
Chris McGuire?
Yes.
Eric Nelson?
Yes.
Ray Jarvis?
Yes.
Shelley Edmondson?
Yes.
Suki Sawyer?
Yes.
Passes unanimously, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Jared. Moving along, agency updates. Office of Law Enforcement, who's in attendance? Lieutenant Bass?
We have Lieutenant Bass and Captain Chapin today.
Thank you. Oh, Jack, you're with us.
Jack, you're muted.
Thank you, Jared. Good morning, everybody. How are you? Again, joined with Matt Bass, and just so you know, I've got a scheduling conflict, so I'm going to jump probably about 9:45 or so, but Matt will be here to field any questions through the meeting. First of all, hey, just wanted to give a shout out to DMF. We had a recent quick operation up in the North Shore regarding AML gear, lobster gear, including the federal NOAA side, New Hampshire Fish and Game, DMF, MEP. Just want to say thank you very much to DMF. Just the turnaround was amazing. In 48 hours, we had all assets working the issue and responding. Jared, thanks again for your quick reactions on the permitting and those conditions there. We did get a big shout out from NOAA. They wanted to say thank you very much too. So I just kind of want to extend that thank you to you all. Thanks. I love it when we work well together. It's a lot of fun when that happens, and just wanted to make sure you're all aware that that was a big impact for us, and thank you very much. Second of all, we do have, we just hired one. He just came in, finished his field training exercise, but he's going to go out to the west side. We have some shortages out there, so that looks like he'll be permanently assigned to the west. That's where he lives. We do have 7 positions to hire. We've got approval for 7, and we're going through that process right now. That's about a 6 to 12 month, process. We're hoping for more after that because we do have retirements coming up as well. So that 7 is going to fill, kind of replace some of the last 2 years of losses. And so hopefully we have some folks behind that, but we do have 7. It is hunting season right now, so a lot of everyone's focus is on the inland side with the hunting and the fishing, but that's just kind of the nature of the beast when we're in the fall. That's all I've got. Does anyone have anything for me?
Questions from commission members?
Suki.
Suki, you're recognized.
Yeah, thank you.
Not to name names, but what was the nature of the accident up on the North Shore?
So there was a lobsterman who's permitted federally and state, and the gear that they had was just not marked. They had some not marking gear. Their tagging issues too. He had tags, but they weren't on the gear there. So there's some complaints that came in from the federal side about that because there was just some entanglements happening, and so they reached out to us, and we just kind of responded and went up there, and we got the Craven, which is our or the DMS lobster hauler, and pulled the gear and inspected it, got it all out of the water, and went through all the gear with the gentleman.
Jack, and just to clarify, by entanglements, you mean guys getting their gear wrapped up around each other, not around a marine mammal, right?
Yes, thank you, Jared, for clarifying that. But it was, yeah, gear entanglements on other people's gear. So it was crossing over. That's where the complaints came in because they started seeing this stuff. It was entangling with the other gear. No marine mammals involved with this at all.
Okay, thanks for that.
Okay.
Question here, not to name names, but was that a JVE operation, Jack? A joint venture?
Oh, J, you mean JEA?
JEA, the joint.
Yeah, joint enforcement agreement.
Yes.
There was partially, but it was also Massachusetts as well. There's a lot, gear was in Massachusetts waters, so it was combined because the gear there was also in Mass waters, but also in federal waters too. So the NOAA NMFIS officer was involved as well.
Thank you, because I thought they were trying to strip funding from the JEA program. So I'm just curious.
No, we're doing pretty good with the JEA program. I run that grant, and so just to let you know, we do well in that program, and this year we did exceptionally well. Again, we don't have control over the federal side, and they don't either. That's just funding that comes from the federal and is distributed out to everybody on the coast through the country. So, but no, we've had good luck with the JEA so far.
Thank you.
Sure. Anything else?
Any other questions from members?
No, I'd say any hands raised, Mr. Chair.
So I presume that's your report, Jack?
Yes, sir.
Okay, moving on. Is the commissioner on today? Department of Fish and Game.
I am, Mr. Chair.
Wow, welcome, Commissioner. Thank you for attending.
Absolutely. Just so everybody knows, I will have to leave early. I've got an event, a land acquisition event in Winchendon, so I gotta head out. But I just wanted to give a quick update on some things since we last met. First, I just wanted to say I am working actively on filling the last and final vacated seat on the commission. So just, hopefully we're going to get that done before the end of the year. And we had some good things happening in terms of some meetings that I think worth sharing. One is that we had a commercial fisheries commission meeting this month, and it was I thought a lot of good content. As you know, Director McKiernan is co-chair with the director of CZM, and we have CBI who facilitates that. I did, was glad to see that they had the designated port assessment. They had some talk about, with a good presentation from Brad Schonelmeyer on offshore wind updates. And I gave a presentation on the marine biodiversity goals. There was a lot of good discussion there in attendance, and I'll be, interested in seeing a report coming out of that commission that would go to the legislature and to the administration to recommend things that can be done in Massachusetts for our commercial fishing industry. There was also a good talk on seafood marketing, and I can let Dan share more of the details on that, but good meeting. In addition, DMF held a meeting with the Department of Capital Asset Management and Maintenance. I was there myself along with the commissioner of DCAM, and that was to really focus on upgrades to the Cat Cove facility in Salem at DMF to really create a marine habitat restoration center. We had some really good ideas on, how this facility could really support scaling up habitat restoration activities with partners across Massachusetts for eelgrass kelp and oyster reefs and other shellfish restoration. So it was really, really well done. And, we're hopeful with the money that I was able to get for capital, to see a vision through here. So that was a really great meeting. Let's see. Also, just wanted to let you know, I'll be there at Seafood Day. I think we've got Seafood Day tomorrow at the State House. So I'll be there. I know the DMF team will be there as well. And it should be a great day, as always. And let's see what else. I think those are sort of the main things. I don't think there's much in addition. I guess, yeah, I think that's good for now, Ray.
Thank you, Commissioner. Questions for the Commissioner from members?
Not seeing any hands raised, Mr. Chair.
Which, reflecting, Tom, I wanted to invite all commission members to Fish Day up on the hill tomorrow. It's from 11 to 1. I should have mentioned that at the opening of the meeting. So I look forward to seeing you there, Tom.
Yep. See you there too, Ray. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner. Okay, moving on. Division of Marine Fisheries Personnel, recent meetings and events, agency activities and projects. Dan?
Thank you, Ray. First thing I want to mention is Story Reed's not present with us today because he and Wendy Mainardi are attending I think a first ever regional meeting of the different state seafood marketing programs, which makes so much sense to me. All of our seafood marketing programs across the region are not very flush, and we're all trying to, promote many of the same species. So it's a great opportunity to sort of combine forces and avoid duplication. So I'm very excited to hear what they come back with. That meeting's being held down at the Westboro office. So I look out the window here and it's sunny, but the recent rains are alleviating some of the severe drought conditions. And I know I talked to Brad Chase, who heads up our diatomaceous fisheries program, and he's optimistic when he sees these kind of fall rains that, young of the year river herring will have a chance to get out to sea, before it gets too late. And it's so we're really hopeful that some of these rains will continue for the sake of the river herring. The drought conditions that we've often seen in summer and fall is a driving factor to a negative factor in year class strength for some of these runs. Today's meeting is going to include a quota managed species wrap up. I do want to give our stats team a shout out for the work that they do to constantly stay in touch with our primary buyers. It's an easier task in the summer when people can fish almost every day and the weather's not a big factor, but you get into this time of year with big weather events that curtail fishing, and it means our staff has to really work the phones and try to understand like what's coming in almost daily in order for us to hit that 100% or something close to that. So, but they do such a great job, and I really appreciate all of their efforts. There's a very important meeting next week in Delaware, the annual meeting of the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission. Two high-profile actions will be adjustments to the menhaden quotas and striped bass conservation. Regardless of what decision is made, there's going to be controversy because there's some serious disagreements among some of the stakeholders on these issues. Also, there's going to be a lobster assessment. Every 5 years, the lobster stocks are assessed. Southern New England is kind of a lost cause because of increasing temperatures. But the Gulf of Maine, Georges Bank stock, where almost all of our lobsters come from and all the nation's lobsters come from, will be assessed. And the assessment is actually available online now. And I'll say that as a former junior lobster biologist, it was a fascinating read for me. I mean, it is long, but it's very well written, and it really describes the state of knowledge of lobster biology and population trends, and it's oceanography as well. So lobster fans would do well to read some of that, and with a good cup of coffee, I guess. But it's a pretty good read. We also completed a survey of our lobstermen's appetite and impressions on the state of affairs of the lobster fisheries. Things like, you know, uh, do you think your next of kin or your next generation in your family is going to be in the lobster business? You know, what do you perceive as the trends and catches? If you had to take a conservation hit, what kind of regulations would you support? Gauge increases, trap cuts, seasons, those kind of things. The three states of Maine, New Hampshire, and Mass all did a similar survey, and so we're going to be presenting those to the ASMFC at the next meeting down in Delaware. And then yesterday I was at a meeting of the Right Whale Consortium. They have a meeting called the Ropers Consortium. Bob Glenn and I, along with Erin Burke and her team, attended, and they also presented at the meeting. These on-demand buoy systems are favored by some lobstermen who are precluded from fishing traps in these time area closures to prevent entanglements. The dilemma facing the industry is the obvious cost to trap fishermen and of also the mobile gear fishermen who need to virtually see the gear. And it's really challenging because it entails things like satellite links for like if you throw your trap over, now you want that dragger 20 minutes from now to know that it's there. And some of these would require the technology to link to satellites in the cloud. So it's a fairly involved process. And there's really, through as I look at it, listening to all the conversations yesterday, I saw like three schools of thought. Some lobstermen and draggers just want it to go away. Some trap fishermen see this as a solution to getting back into closed areas. And then some conservationists, and I would think some of the gear developers, think that this has the potential to become a trend where eventually most buoy gear is replaced by this on-demand gear for the sake of protected species and turtles and the like. And I just remind the commission that these projects are being funded by Congress. When Congress gave the lobster industry a 6-year pause, they poured a whole bunch of money into programs to help investigate the potential for this gear, but also to figure out where and when whales are present, so we can decide where or when this kind of gear might be required. And so Bob, or rather Erin Burke and her team are busy with the passive acoustic monitors and the data collection. And I know that they presented to this commission back in the spring. And then finally, there's been a lot of buzz over the last couple of days about a horseshoe crab bill in the legislature. And it's been filed by some of the folks that you're familiar with. And what it is attempting to do is to essentially eliminating the harvest of horseshoe crabs for purposes of bait. In other words, the bait quota. Recall that through this commission, we have two separate quotas in Massachusetts. We have a biomedical quota of 200,000 crabs, and we have a bait quota of 140,000 crabs. And what this bill would do is to basically eliminate that 140,000 crab quota, or it would more specifically prevent us in regulation from having a bait quota. What it doesn't do is prohibit the use of crabs as bait. And so that's awkward. So then I guess, if this were to ever pass, we could probably import crabs from another state, although those are in short supply. But, we obviously, and I'm going to quote well, first of all, let me just say that this bill is being heard today among many, many other bills. The public comment period is open. There's no vote that's taken today by the committee, it's my understanding. And as with all legislation, DMF would work through the department and the Secretary of Environmental Affairs to submit comments on behalf of the executive branch. It's not something that I would do unilaterally. I'm just going to go back to the minutes of the September meeting describing what happened. Of the August meeting rather, when the minutes in that mentioned that Jamie Bassett from Chatham came to the meeting with a letter that was given to you and made public to asking that we consider possibly flexibility about moving quota between these two sectors. And we pledge to look at the trends in our fishery and also in our data. And we've been doing that. We've held 3 meetings with primary buyers of whelk, and those primary buyers also tend to be the purveyors of horseshoe crab bait as well, because that's how that system works. The harvesters get an opportunity to get their bait needs met by the dealer. So many of these dealers either have inventory or have a good understanding of what their needs are going to be. So we've been talking to them, good in-depth conversations, and it's our intent to come to your next meeting or no later than December with some proposals for next year that that might consider altering some quotas for next year. As we mentioned at the meeting in August, the functional need of our bait of the bait users is off by at least 50% from a decade ago. So it's not inappropriate for us to sort of modernize some of our regulations in the future relative to what the local needs are, and especially if those needs have evolved. So I'm going to stop there. Again, it's the bill is being heard today. We can send that around and let you know, but I'll work through the commissioner and see if we can we'll be taking, and I suspect we will, a formal position on that. So that's all I have for today. I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Dan. Questions for the director?
Suki?
Yeah, thanks,
You're
Dan.
recognized.
Thanks. Thank you. A couple of things, Dan. People have been calling me up, wondering why they were eel endorsements are being taken away. I didn't know anything about any of that. You want to
Yeah.
talk that up? And the other thing is probably the division might have some knowledge of it, but I don't know if we can do anything. They've cut the recreational surf clam here, limit to 15 clams per person. Do you know why there was any? Yeah.
No. Well, I'll get to the second one first. Surf clams at the commercial level are managed by DMF. They're not it's not a municipally managed fishery, but at the recreational level, it is a species that is under municipal control. I can have staff look into, what the rationale for that, but I was not made aware of that, but we'll look into that, Suki.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and then your first question about getting notified about losing the eel permit or being notified, this commission, I'm trying to remember when we passed it. It was in the last, I think it was in the spring.
April.
Yeah, the April meeting, I came to you with a proposal to basically only reissue eel permits to people who are reporting eels. And we had, I would say about 95% of our permit holders were not reporting taking any fish. And our entire annual harvest was around 1,000 pounds. And, we had some suspicion about that. And so anyway, we did, folks who held that permit and folks who held the Menhaden endorsement, both were sent a letter over the summer telling them whether they qualify to retain that permit going forward based on a minimum activity threshold that we put in that memo.
Okay, I'm just drawing a blank on the whole eel thing, so sorry about that. I just
Yeah.
don't remember
we
the
can
active.
resurrect.
The Menhaden is one thing, but the eel, I'm not.
Yeah.
So I'm just not remembering any of that. That's
We'll
all.
resurrect that, Suki, and we'll send it out to you. I'll have Jared do that at the end of the meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Suki. Questions for the director?
I'm not seeing any other hands raised, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, Dan, I have a question about this eel endorsement. what was the threshold? Because I know that's been an issue for us at ASMFC, where de minimis, if I'm not mistaken, and we've often wondered amongst the delegates at the table for Massachusetts, and it's been a concern of yours over the years. So what was the protocol? What was the cutoff line? What did they have to show? Receipts or?
Well, we have that data, Ray. I mean, years ago, before we had mandatory reporting, receipts would have been the appropriate thing to show. But in this case, we have a mandatory reporting system, and I believe, Jared, do you recall? Was it any landings in the last
I
10
believe
years. 10 years.
Go ahead. Repeat that.
And any landings in the last 10 years using a new control date of December 31st, 2024. So the 10 years preceding that control date, just at least 1 pound landed on your own harvester reports.
Yeah. Not very restrictive.
No, not at all. Thank you for that. Good morning, Nicola.
Thank
Good
you,
morning.
Nick.
Any other questions for the director?
not seeing any hands raised, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Jared. Let's move along to the Belding Award nomination. We're going to need a roll call vote on this. Hopefully everybody read their packets and they're familiar with the nomination.
Yeah, Ray, Jared, did you send that list around, or do you just want to show it up on the screen? I just want to give a little more
Yeah,
background.
just give me one moment.
Yeah, let me just start off by saying that, especially with two new commission members, Ray Jarvis and Eric Nelson, maybe a little more background is in order. So this Belding Award was created back in the early 90s by the descendants of David Belding. And David Belding was this amazing character. He was a medical doctor and a marine biologist or naturalist. And he wrote some incredible treatises on the organisms themselves, such as like a river herring and bay scallops and quahogs and oysters. But in addition, he captured a lot of fishery descriptions as well. And he's just an amazing guy. And so the family, or the descendants of David Belding, came to us with this idea, and along with a lot of his papers. And so we accepted a small amount of money that we put into an account, and we've been able to purchase in the years that we've given it out, like an annual gift. And so this year's nomination that we brought forth, actually that one of our staff brought forth, is Henry Lynn. And Henry is a well-known person for about 60 years in the shellfish and natural resource areas of the Outer Cape. He was I believe, an Eastham constable, but most impressive for me right now is his continued involvement at a fairly advanced age with the development of a shellfish constable's training course, which he's really taken the lead on in working with Cape Cod Community College to make it into a college course, and something that is a combination of virtual meetings, but also some in person. So he's really been instrumental in developing that, and he's held in the highest regard by so many of the constables around the state for his involvement. And he does it all gratis, and we're so grateful for the work that he's doing and that he's done in the past. And so the staff really wanted to recognize him, and the Belding fits because so many of Belding's reports really had a lot of local information. Like if you want to learn about the history of river herring runs throughout the state, but at a local level, it's all captured in those reports. And we'd be happy to give you guys the links to many of those reports, which are online. And also, I asked Jared to resurrect the list of previous award winners. And so, going back to 1990, I'll just very briefly, Liz Strohmeyer was she was our MFAC chairman, but also she was a key part of a lot of ASMFC, advisory panels. Lester Smith was a recreational fishing advocate. Hal Lyman was the founder of Saltwater Sportsman magazine. Frank Grice was a former DMF director and a NOAA fisheries official as well. Frank Meraki, we all know Frank Meraki, and it's amazing that it's been so long since we gave Frank that award. Frank is a former commercial fisherman from Situate, and just such a great contributor to common sense policies. Jack Crowley was a marine educator. Henry Souza was a dragger out of Provincetown who developed with us the raised foot rope trawl. Bob Pond was a well-known striped bass conservationist. Stormy Mayo is the right whale whisperer, right whale scientist from Provincetown Center for Coastal Studies. Steve Clark was a former lifelong stock assessment specialist at NOAA Fisheries. Tony Verga was a state rep who also was part of the ASMFC delegation going back as a believe a legislative appointee even before he became a legislator. So he was well known. He recently passed a few years ago. Bruce Tarr, another well-known Cape Ann political figure, but Bruce is probably one of the most ardent supporters of marine fisheries and in general and statewide. Arnie Howe founded our resource assessment project. Steve Morawski was a senior stock assessment specialist down at the Northeast Fisheries Science Center. Kevin Stokesbury, you know him from SMAS, did great work with scallops and great cooperative researcher. Don Anderson is a WHOI, Woods Hole Oceanographic researcher specializing in toxins and red tide. Dick Quinn is he was a well-known person who worked for U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and he designed fishways, and incredibly impactful. John Hughes founded the lobster hatchery on Martha's Vineyard, and we renamed the lobster hatchery on Martha's Vineyard in his name, and we've turned over that hatchery to the Martha's Vineyard Shellfish Group. Paul Diodati needs no introduction, former director. Bill Adler served on this commission, I don't know, almost 28, 30 years. Nobody was better at proofreading the minutes. Bill, who was a former English teacher, but a lifelong lobsterman and the executive director. He was Beth Cassoni's predecessor. Arthur DaCosta did great work for us in cooperative research, especially with whelk fisheries, and developed the gauge. Mark Amarello was our commission chair for at least a couple of decades, but he was a very long-standing member. And then Mike Armstrong. Mike Hickey was we gave it to him posthumously, but he headed up our shellfish program and was a DMF employee for 51 years. And of course, Mike Armstrong, we gave it to him last year for all his contributions to marine fisheries, stock assessments, the interstate fisheries management process, and the rest. So 2025, if you approve it, would be Henry Lind. You can see it's a nice mix of people on this commission, people from DMF, leading, regionally important researchers, advocates, who really fight all the time for our causes, and so I just thought it would be helpful for you all to see sort of the breadth of the past recipients, so that for 2026, as some of you may have some ideas, you could bring those nominations forward or feel comfortable bringing somebody forward, knowing the sort of the history and the sort of the array and the kind of individuals that we've honored in the past. So I guess we'd be looking for a motion. I don't know, Bill Amaru, I think of all the commission members, you might know Henry the best. I don't know if you want to speak about Henry.
Well, everything you've said is accurate about Henry. His dedication, his respect from the industry is unparalleled out here on the Outer Cape, and he continues to set examples that we all should follow for conscientious harvesting and maintenance of our resources. So he's an absolutely deserving nominee, and I will make the motion to nominate him.
Thank you, Bill. I need a second.
I'll second that. You know, in the little bit of reading that I did about Henry, he certainly has contributed a lot of his life to, you know, the resources here in Massachusetts, and it was an interesting read. And you know, he's a great example of just giving back to the resource. So I second the motion.
Thank you, Ray. Jared, you can call a roll call vote on this.
Bill Amaru,
Yes.
Bill Doyle. Bill Doyle. Chris McGuire,
Yes.
Eric Nelson,
Yes.
Ray Jarvis,
Yes.
Shelley Edmondson,
Yes.
Sookie Sawyer.
Yes.
Approved with one abstention, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Jared. I need the agenda posted again.
Yep, give
My
me one
agenda
moment.
reads differently than the agenda posted today.
Give me one moment to clear my screen and I'll get that going for you.
And a question to Dan, when will we be presenting the Belden Award? I know Mike Armstrong, I believe, was up in Cat Cove in June.
Yeah, I think what we'll try to do is bring them to your next in-person meeting, which might be December.
Next month.
Next month.
Next month.
Oh, next month. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let me work on that. Let me make sure he's available. But I'll try to do it as soon as we can, relative to his availability and this commission schedule.
Thank you, Dan.
Yeah.
Ray?
Yeah.
Yeah, Bill Doyle. I'm sorry, had a little muting issue. I'm in favor of the nominee for the Belden Award. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. That makes it unanimous, Jared. No abstentions.
Roger that.
Thank you all. Update on the performance of the 2025 Quota Managed Fisheries. And I have to give a shout out to Story and his staff, Anna Webb, speaking to a black sea bass fisherman and to the striper, commercial striper fisherman, how spot on DMF has been over the years on a closure date or even on the projections. Like I had a black sea bass fisherman call me up and he said, how much longer do you think it's going to go? And I said, I thought the last projection I saw was October 10th. And here we are, what it closed yesterday being what, the 21st or the 20th. So that's a shout out to Anna Webb and Story. So who's going to be speaking on behalf of the update?
Anna?
Anna, and I will turn it over to her to share her screen.
Thank you, Jared. Good morning, Anna.
Good morning, everybody. I am fairly sick, so bear with me as I get through this. Give me 1 second to get this up. All right, just make sure that I'm sharing the right screen.
You are.
Excellent. All right, so this will be a little quick so that I don't have to talk very long. But I'm going to start with the things that are kind of closed or over. So summer SCUP ended at the end of September. And we're now in the winter 2 period, which is federally managed. So I just wanted to show the final tally for SCUP as it is right now. It is slightly the lowest it's been in a while, but it's just slightly under 2023. Also, I'm working on making these figures more readable, and it didn't quite solve the problem of the overlap on the figure on the left with the summary table and the lines, but I will work on that for next time. All right, so Tautog, we closed this last fishing day was Friday. It as Dan mentioned earlier and as Ray mentioned, there's been quite a lot of communication happening in the last week and a half, particularly surrounding tautog and black sea bass. The storm really disrupted fishing, so right at the day it was supposed to close. So we had quite a bit of movement over the last week. So we do expect this to change a little bit, but we do expect tautog to land almost around 100%. We're actually only 1,000 pounds under right now, so I think as last week finally comes in, we should be very close to 100. And as a reminder, these figures are only through or do not include last week. They include any landings that have been reported, but they're not. The most recent final week ended on the 11th. The other last week's reports are due today. So we're still waiting to see what last week's final tally was. But ultimately, 2025 ran very similar to 2023 as well. We did not have that really big spike we saw in 2024, where we had the earliest closure to date. Black sea bass, it is closed as of today. This is another fishery that got our projections got heavily disrupted by the storms. We do expect a slight underage here when all is said and done, but we're within 2%, we believe, by the time we settle all of last week through yesterday. Excuse me. So moving on to things that are still open. Fluke is still open. We did increase to 5,000 pounds on October 1st. And we do have a projected date in early November now, and that's subject to change. The weather also contributes to this as well, so we do expect a little bit of a change over the next, or once last week's are included. Bait horseshoe crab, we are very, very close here, under 4,000 pound or 4,000 crabs left. But we are working very closely with the dealers, so we know almost to the date when this is going to close, and it may actually stay open for a little bit longer as the final numbers trickle in. But so this is projected for October 19th, but obviously that is passed, and the fishery remains open, partly due to the storm and partly due to how the dealers are adjusting their activity. Menhaden, oops, sorry for the overlap there. The EESA is still ongoing. Nicola, do you have any updates on that you would want to share? I don't have any off the top of my head, but these figures go above the 100% quota because of that EESA.
Yeah, I'd just say that Maine exited the EESA, so we're the only state participating in it right now, and we'll just stay in it until it's getting close to full utilization. But landings are pretty slow.
Nicola, do you just want to mention what the ESA is?
The episodic event set aside, which is 1% that comes off the top of the coastwide quota, and the states of Maine through New York can opt into it if they use up their allocated quota prior to September 1st. So Maine and Massachusetts drew down from that 1% this year.
Yeah, and I'd just add that as part of the rulemaking in the spring that this commission approved, we decided to fill our quota 100% with the expectation that we would then draw on the episodic event set aside sub-quota. And I think that was pretty successful for us this year. So,
may I follow up with a question for Nicola?
Yep.
Yeah, Nicola, I realize it's another state issue, but will those permit holders in the state of Maine be able to still land less than 6,000 pounds a day? Or is it shut down completely?
Well, where Maine? So Maine
Yes.
is Maine got some additional quota after they left the EESA, and so I haven't checked recently, but I knew that they continued to operate after the EESA, and they Maine kind of purposely left it so that there would be there would be quota left for Massachusetts to continue to draw down slowly from.
Yeah, Nicola, when you said they got more quota, they got a transfer from another
Yes.
state that had an unused quota, yeah.
Yes. Yep.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Back to.
Great. All right. So next up, bluefish. We did transfer some. Oops, sorry. This quota is incorrect on the left. As I was playing with these figures, it has the old quota. We did transfer some to another state, but we are leveling off at this point. I don't expect much more bluefish to come in. And then I was asked to include spiny dogfish for this month. And this is a different figure on the left because this is a coast-wide quota. So I put in the figure from the NOAA quota monitoring website. Just note that it was last updated in September before the shutdown. So this site has not been updated. I do know that quota monitoring is happening, but clearly spiny dogfish is not a priority at the moment, as it is still pretty early in the fishing year for that species. But our landings are a little lower this year, and that drop off sort of happened earlier than maybe it has in the past. And that's it for me.
Questions for Anna?
Not seeing any hands raised, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Jared. Thank you, Anna. Feel better.
Thanks. You'll hear from me again in a few minutes, but then I'll stop talking.
Okay. Need an agenda once again because mine reads differently. Okay, we're moving on to discussion items. Review of upcoming October ASMFC meeting. And who's got this, Dan or Nicola?
Combination of both. I'll let Nick kick it off. As I mentioned earlier, there was about the controversial species for this upcoming meeting are obviously menhaden, striped bass, a little bit of lobster. But one of the things I've asked Nick to do is to focus on some of the striped bass issues, especially the Massachusetts hearings that we held, because we had two hearings in state. One was up in was it Woburn, and the other down at the Mass Maritime. And Nicola's going to kind of describe those hearings in some detail.
Okay, good morning, everyone. So I'll focus on the public comment that we have so far on draft addendum 3, and then the menhaden specifications that Dan mentioned, and then turn to Anna for a little glimpse into some of the lobster industry survey results. So, what we have in the public comment so far on draft addendum 3 includes the hearing summaries from the 17 public hearings that occurred coast-wide, as well as survey results. ASMC used SurveyMonkey, that tool, to allow for respondents to just quickly, check off which options that they wanted, and also ask some open-ended questions about when you would prefer closures to be, some things like that. So those multiple choice questions, I have the results from those from the ASMC staff. The open-ended questions where people typed in long answers with their opinions, I don't have those results. And there's also the written comment has not been tabulated in the briefing materials that came out late last week. They're going to be in the supplemental materials this week, but I understand that there are over 1,000 additional letters. A couple things to think about when I share these results is that the hearings often tended to have more speakers that represented either a for-hire or a commercial background. There was often a lot of attendees at the hearings that did not provide comment, and you'll see that in kind of the difference between the attendee numbers and then the comment numbers in the tables that I'm going to show. Um, uh, Contrary to that, the survey that ASMC used, about 90% of the respondents identified as anglers, private recreational anglers within that survey. Then about 7% for hire and 1% commercial or shoreside support industries. So these results that I'm going to share, they don't represent all of the comments that we've received that are going to be coming before the board, and they also might not represent all stakeholders. There tends to be, certain groups, types of individuals that are more likely to comment on fisheries matters. But of that survey that ASMC put out, about a quarter of the responses came from individuals that identified as being from Massachusetts. Moving on to the next slide. So I'm just going to have a table that shows kind of the responses for each of the 4 major issues. The first one was the definition of total length, and across all of the hearings, the Massachusetts hearings and the survey responses, the majority opinion was in favor of option B, which is to standardize the definition of total length with the 4 elements of tail squeezed, that's kind of the big one, straight line measurement, the fish is laid flat, and the mouth is closed, for the reasons that it upholds the intended conservation, it improves compliance and enforcement, it's consistent and fair across all the states. There was a minority of individuals that had concerns that it would be too difficult to get this type of measurement just right, and that it could increase handling time and release mortality, but that seemed to be a minority opinion. And Massachusetts is largely already compliant with this type of language. We just don't have the laid flat part within our own regulations. On the second issue, on the next slide, it is the commercial tagging. Here, the question is whether to maintain the state flexibility to have point of harvest or a point of sale tagging, or require point of harvest or prior to landing tagging. So harvest or tagging in either of those scenarios. Across all of the hearings and the survey, the majority of comments were in favor of option B, the point of harvest tagging, to improve the accountability and reporting, address permit misuse. There was a number of comments that were, specifically referencing Massachusetts with our open entry commercial fishery, the only one that is open entry along the coast. And they perceive the point of harvest tagging as being an enforcement benefit, and if done, soon after harvest, that it could reduce high grading as well. I think, not surprisingly, the responses from Massachusetts, one of the states that would be impacted by the change, the majority opinion was for status quo. There were concerns from our hearing attendees that this would impact how the division issues permits. As we've talked about, it would be very difficult, if not impossible, for us to administer tags to nearly 5,000 permit holders. But there also was comment that the program is working. There's difference among the states. This isn't something that needs to be standardized because of those differences. Issue 3 is on the next slide, is the Maryland Chesapeake Bay recreational season baseline. This issue would allow Maryland to change their recreational season in the Chesapeake Bay in a way that's designed to be net neutral, or with option C, it includes an uncertainty buffer. So they'd have to make it a little bit more conservation forward to address the uncertainty of the calculations and how they came up with this alternative season. Across the hearings, coastwide and the Massachusetts hearings, the majority preferred status quo. I'd note that across all hearings where it says 216 were for status quo, nearly 200 of those came from a single Maryland public hearing. So, as you might be expected, this issue really had a lot of comment from Maryland stakeholders and not as much input at the hearings elsewhere. But from the survey, there was a majority support for option C, which would allow Maryland to change the rule the season, but include that uncertainty buffer. The common thread across all of these sources of comment was that they did not prefer the allowing Maryland to change the season without a little bit of additional buffer on it. Moving on to issue 3.4, the big one I would say is the measures to support stock rebuilding with a 12% reduction to increase the probability of rebuilding the stock to 50% by the rebuilding deadline of 2029. Across the hearings, coastwide as well as Massachusetts's, the pretty vast majority was for status quo. Again, a lot of the hearing participants, those that spoke, represented a for-hire commercial background. That was pretty notable at the Massachusetts hearings. And then within the survey results, there was a majority that supported the 12% reduction. Those that prefer status quo on this issue pointed out that fishing mortality is at a 30-year low, that the causes of stock decline are environmentally caused from climate change or predation issues with catfish or prey issues with menhaden fishing. They pointed that spawning stock biomass is trending up, and the projections show that we would cross the target level by 2032. So they had a preference to avoid the economic impacts of additional regulations and allow for an extended timeline to rebuild the stock. They also noted that the preliminary, partial year MRIP estimates for 2025 are down, whereas the projections assume an increase in harvest in 2025 and an increase in fishing mortality. Notably, those MRIP estimates are preliminary and they represent 2 waves that make up less than 40% of the annual catch typically. But overall, they preferred to wait to the benchmark assessment was completed in 2027 to have a better understanding of stock status, particularly after the MRIP data are recalibrated next year, after Massachusetts's release mortality work can be incorporated into the next stock assessment, and when the biological reference points could be reconsidered. Those supporting the 12% reduction, indicated that regardless of why there is problems with the stock, we should be responding to the 7 years. Well, it was 6 years of recruitment failure at the time of the public hearing. Since then, Maryland has released the 2025 Juvenile Index Survey, which is another year of well below average. So it's now 7 years of recruitment failure out of Chesapeake Bay. So they pointed to that and the need to protect spawning stock biomass. They've pointed out that one of the sensitivity projections that uses the very low recruitment of just the last 6 years does not show rebuilding to the target in any year. They noted that abundance, even though SSB is projected to increase, abundance is declining. That's what supports the fishery. And many individuals were willing to take larger cuts and calling for a full harvest moratorium, an annual no harvest closure as opposed to just the seasonal types of closures that are being considered. And they wanted the board to uphold their commitment to rebuild the stock by 2029 with at least a 50% probability.
Hey, Nick, do you want to define abundance for the commission?
Abundance is the count of all fish of all age classes, while spawning stock biomass is just the reproductively mature females. So starting around age 4, some females begin to reach maturity, and SSB is projected to increase right now because we have year classes from 2015, 2018, and even 2011 that are still in the spawning stock biomass. But then after 2018, that's when the low year classes start, and so there won't be, any large, cohorts aging into the SSB after the 2018 year class at this point. And so there was a little bit more information about the 12% reduction in terms of how you apply it to the recreational fishery. There's options for in the ocean recreational fishery to keep the current slot limit and take a 12% seasonal cut, or option O2 would allow for higher fishery to have a slightly wider slot and take a 13% seasonal cut as a consequence. Across all the hearings and the survey, the preference was for not pursuing the mode split option. The Massachusetts hearings were split, 5 and 5 in favor of these two options. I think because of the for hire representation at our public hearings. And then lastly, in terms of no harvesting or no targeting types of closures, next slide. The preference is across the three sources of public comment that we have here. The preference was for a no harvest closure. Individuals pointed to concerns with the compliance and enforcement of no targeting closures, that no harvest closures are more likely to achieve the intended reduction, and that there are less negative impacts across the fishery when catch and release fishing is still allowed. Whereas those favoring no targeting noted that the closures could be shorter when no targeting is the rule, that addresses release mortality better, and that it provides for equity among catch and release anglers and harvesting anglers. In terms of the specific times of closures, that wasn't really like a multiple choice type of question, so I didn't try to capture the kind of the comments yet about when the closure should be. At our Massachusetts hearings, there were some, comments that the closure should be in July and August because that's when they're the shortest. There were others that thought that, that is the peak season for fishing, and they don't want to take a closure then. So there was preference for, closing at the beginning or the end of the season instead. So still weighing all those comments, and I think the delegates to the ASMFC are having lots of conversations this week, as regions to figure out what might be the most palatable option to try to pursue if the reduction option were to be preferred by the board. And that, I think, takes us, to the end of that issue. If there's any questions on it, on the comment, I'd be happy to
Well-
try to answer it.
Yeah.
If I could, one of the issues I think would be good to maybe address, even though it's very, very early in the conversation, is the Massachusetts DMF submitted data to the stock assessment workshop about release mortality. And then the reason I bring this up is, it is probably causing somewhat of a buzz around the waterfront just because of its timing. But we've been working on this for a couple of years. And if you could, maybe sort of try to shoehorn those findings into what it would mean, what effect it has on the no target versus no harvest sort of dynamic, if
Right.
that makes sense.
Yes. So our preliminary results from 2-3 years worth of data collection and surveying anglers about their tackle choices is showing that rather than the 9% release mortality rate that we've used in stock assessments for a very long time, that the release mortality rate on average is closer to 4.5%, 4.2%, but that it is also length dependent and increases with the size of fish. So what that means is that regulations to restrict harvest can do more than regulations to restrict targeting, since the release mortality rate is lower than we thought. So that is a good piece of information when thinking about the options in the document for whether closures or no harvesting or no targeting.
Yeah, and just to follow up, our information was presented to that stock assessment committee for incorporation into the next stock assessment. So we're dealing with a situation where those findings aren't necessarily part of this addendum. So but that's just the nature. I mean, in any given year, you have different parameters and new values come in for those parameters. And, just to keep, you have to incorporate them as you get them. So, but it might affect some of the debate, I believe. And specifically what I want to say is the recreational fishery has been sort of vilified by some at the table at ASMFC for causing all this needless mortality in terms of the catch and release. But it appears that it's not as bad as it's been portrayed. And I think that will make for some interesting discussion.
Questions for Nicola? Jared?
Ray Jarvis.
Ray, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I was at the Bourne meeting there, and I found it, interesting on who commented and how the comments were directed. I did find that, a lot of the for hire and those profiting from the fishery were calling more for a status quo stance. And not surprisingly, I feel as if a lot of those comments were more self-serving than anything. I hate to use the term, but almost narrow-minded in the face of where the stock is. A lot of these guys know how to fish and they fish well, so they do see a lot of fish still. But for the average angler who goes out, a lot of these days spent on the water are spent searching for striped bass rather than catching striped bass. So I think that status quo is it's dangerous at this point, and the proposed reductions are a 50% possibility of rebuilding. I feel as if this fishery is taking more of a dive than we think, and I see it in the water around me. I'm on the water quite often, so I can be lumped into that group where I do see good striped bass fishing, but that's because I'm able to follow these schools of fish around and stay on these small biomasses that are around through the season. But I think that there is serious concern as far as seeing smaller fish in the water. And I think that a lot of the comments from this meeting that I attended were just, not really erring on the side of caution, but more self-serving guys were concerned about their businesses going under, which I totally understand. But I think that it's not really the time for status quo, but maybe more of a time for those involved to alter their business plan a little bit and keep in mind that, down the line, if this fishery does collapse, they will not have a business regardless of their current stance. And with the information that Dan and Nicola just mentioned with the release mortality, I think this should greatly impact the debate at the meeting. And, a lot of the comments by those on the commercial and or for hire side were blaming a lot of the impact on the recreational anglers, saying that, a lot of the impact to the fishery came directly from the recreational side, and their stance was on that 9%. But I think in the face of these new numbers, it should be debated, and it should be, something that will be interesting to hear about at the meeting. But those are just my comments. So thank you.
Thank you, Ray.
Eric
What?
Nelson?
Good morning. I attended the Woburn meeting and I listened in on the meeting down Buzzards Bay or wherever it was. And I guess my observations are similar to Ray's in terms of what I observed. I think it's important to note that the attendees were largely on the commercial and for hire side and very few on the rec side. So I think it's the results from the meetings are skewed. And I think, as Ray noted, most of the comments received were, I guess, more or less self-serving in terms of just what is best for their own business. And I think we should, take that in mind. Beyond that, I think it's clear that something needs to be done. I agree with the information we have, and I think the new information on the release mortality is important to note. I'd be curious to know what our plans are. If we have plans for how we as a state intend to vote, given the information we have. I have thoughts on all things, but I'll hold commenting on the specifics unless there's a reason to. But thank you, Nicola. That was a good summary based on my observations of what happened at these meetings.
Questions for Nicola? Thank you.
Bill Amaru.
Bill, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, it's very good expose on the situation. One of the things I want to mention right at the get-go, I saw on Saving Seafood this morning that the beach seine survey that was done during the latter part of the summer down in the Chesapeake, Delaware region was yielded results that were about in the middle for the long-term averages for recruitment. So, or at least we didn't slip any further behind. Do you recall seeing that, Nicola?
I did, and I know the Maryland press release called it a slight increase, but it is still well below the long-term average. The long-term average is 11. The 2025 average is 4. And it's, so it's higher than the 3%, 3, not percent, but the 3 that it was, in the last couple of years. But to call it a slight increase is really putting a positive spin on it.
Well, yeah, they did. And it was only an increase in relation to the past, as you just mentioned, a couple of years. So anyway, we didn't slip terribly behind. We're not moving forward though either. So the other thing I wanted to say, this is not a fishery I'm terribly familiar with. I got to admit, I fish with hook and line now at the very end of my career. But one thing I can tell you, the release mortality discussion, it amazes me that throughout this entire time that we've been talking about it, the idea of using a barbless hook has never surfaced in a way that would make me think that it's even being considered. And it surprises me that the industry itself doesn't come up with this concept. I know that there's issues surrounding it that have been mentioned when we did talk about it once before a couple of years ago, but it just seems to be dead in the water, and I don't understand why. With the perceived mortality and the actual mortality that occurs, a lot of that could be eliminated by the change in the technique of a barbless type hook. We even closed the barbs on our hooks this past year. We did towards the end when we were getting a lot of small fluke, and we're not losing that many more. We might have lost 10% of fish that did come off the hooks on the way up, but in general, they just come off so much easier, and they're virtually uninjured, and they go right back into the water. And it makes sense to me to have that discussion. And those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. And if I'm not mistaken, Nicola, we've spoken about this before. Wouldn't that have to be brought forward in the next addendum to striped bass, like a barbless hook, and only one hook per lure? We've been talking about that, or maybe not you and I, but I've been chatting with people about that.
Right. Those are the types of measures that could be brought forward in a future addendum if we're trying to get, release mortality down even lower than, 4%, But, with those results, there may be more savings to be gained from harvest restrictions as opposed to reducing release mortality further. I think part of the reason that the board is focused on, uh, other alternatives is that Massachusetts was, updating redoing the work to update that mortality rate. And so I think as we get to the end of that work, it could refocus the conversation on release mortality and whether measures need to try to further reduce that.
Hey,
Thank
Nick,
you.
do you want to have Ben weigh in? He's in the attendees list right now. So I
Ben
don't know if we
Gay,
could.
Ben, you recognize.
Thank you, Ray. Bill, I just wanted to just provide some more context to your comment about the debarbing hooks. We didn't look at that specifically when we did the initial study because it was really about J versus circle hooks, and we didn't look at getting rid of barbs on anything. I kind of wish we did looking back, but what the data did say relevant to that was that handling time is very important for post-release mortality. And so we have been trying to put out in both written and verbal advice to anglers throughout the course of this year that debarbing your hooks is a great way to reduce your handling time, because obviously once you get that fish boat side, the hook's going to come out a lot easier. So we have incorporated that into our advice.
Oh, good, good. That's good.
So it is certainly something that we are encouraging.
Yeah, good step in the right direction. And
thank you.
Since I mentioned, thank you, Ben. Nicola, the 4% number that you just mentioned, does that assume that the fish has only been caught once? Because I have the feeling that these fish down where I pass through on my way to the fluke grounds, and I see the same boats fishing the same rips, I can't imagine that they're only getting caught once. So if they're getting caught twice, 3 times in a relatively short period of time, how does that affect their survival? Has that been figured in?
Ben, do you want to address that?
Sure. Unfortunately, that's just not something, unless we were able to recapture a fish, it's not something we could address with when we did this. So we certainly know that fish are being recaptured multiple times. We all catch those fish. But when we were doing the initial tagging study that informed the mortality rate, we weren't able to do that. We had hoped to do that as part of a tag retention study where we put some tagged fish into Smith Pool at Cat Cove, and we just weren't successful enough in recapturing individual fish, even in that small location. So that's still out there, and it is a caveat to the data that repeated capture events, repeated catch and release events may lead to more mortality. We did a study on the Housatonic River. If you're familiar with that winter fishery on the Housatonic River down in Connecticut, we helped Connecticut DEEP tag a bunch of fish down there to look at post-release mortality. And while we didn't observe any fish that died after they were caught and released by our anglers, we did have a handful of fish, like 4, that died 3 to 4 weeks later. And that may have been exactly what you're talking about, where fish are getting caught multiple times and that ends up leading to death.
All right. Well, the conversation reminds me of a conversation I had a little over a year and a half ago with a certain Phil Coates and his good friend and mine, Randy Fairbanks, both top biologists with DMF. Both of them expressed to me their concern about mortality due to a repeated. They were fundamentally opposed to the slot that was getting narrower and narrower, but they were also concerned about repeat capture and release. So those are my comments, and I thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Ben. Questions for Nicola or Ben?
Eric Nelson?
Eric, you recognize.
Yes, thank you. A comment on the repeated catch. Several times a year, I catch stripers that have been caught previously. They have hooks and leaders dangling, out of the mouth and down the body, sometimes a couple feet long, and the fish is still actively feeding. I've caught fish with old, mostly corroded hooks inside the mouth, and the fish seem quite healthy and still feeding. So I think the fact that fish has been caught before doesn't mean they're going to die if they're released properly or whatever. They still will keep on going in my experience, maybe not all cases. I think I'm happy to see the change in release mortality number to 4.2%. That's probably close in line to my observations. I guess one big unknown I have, sometimes using circle hooks, the fish nevertheless swallow the hook and you have to cut them. I don't know what happens to those fish. They swim away right away, but long term, I just don't know what happens. That's something probably a barbless hook wouldn't address, but just kind of a comment. But one more comment on a different matter. Talking to a lot of people about this issue, many people bring out the concerns about what's happening in Chesapeake Bay and the environmental conditions, the catfish, and whatever. And I think no matter what we do, as far as our vote as a state, we press to try to understand more what is actually happening in Chesapeake Bay as far as environmental conditions, because a lot of people have that question. I think they're willing to go along with conservation measures, as I am, but I think we need to understand long-term what this means for the fishery. And I think that's a huge unknown we need to address in some fashion. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Questions for Nicola or Ben?
Not
Jared?
seeing any other hands raised, Mr. Chair. We can continue.
Okay, if I can take a moment, then I have two questions for Nicola. We're talking about this release mortality number almost being halved. We've been told for years it's 9%. So my question is, how does that affect the stock assessment? Or in the future, how will that affect the stock assessment?
That is a great question, and I think one that we really have to wait for the stock assessment to say with any certainty. It means that removals from release mortality will be lower. It also, fishing mortality could be lower, but it's also likely to affect the reference points. It's because it's age dependent, or at length and age dependent. The rate, it'll change the selectivity and mean that, it's focused more on larger fish. And that feeds into your reference point. So what it means for, where we are in terms of our reference points, I think we have to wait to see. I kind of put it in that same category of, we know something is coming with the MRIP recalibration, and we maybe have some ideas as to what it might mean, but you don't know that for sure until the assessment is done.
Okay, that answers question one. Question two, if we can go back to that slide 3.4, stock rebuilding, please. No, stock
One more
rebuilding.
back. Yeah.
Yeah, there we are. So I listened in to the Woburn meeting. I attended the maritime meeting, as I encouraged many commission members to listen to out-of-state meetings, meetings held in other states. I don't know how many commission members did. My concern is on the survey, the 68%. Did ASMSC question format letters? Because at public hearings, all these concerned recreational fishermen weren't there, other than states that only have a recreational fishery. But the states that have a commercial recreational fishery, a lot of recreational fish, they didn't have great attendance, a lot of commercial attendance. But my question is, on that survey of the 68% I'm looking at, which is highlighted, how many of those letters were format letters, sent out by a club or, an angling club or
Right. Yep. So I don't know. So these were survey responses, which are different from the written letters, even a form letter. Those haven't been put into the briefing book yet and tabulated. This was really just a survey where you could collect, hit on option A or option B. And so I think that, to your point though, Ray, is that, we don't know which angling groups, for example, told their folks to go fill out the survey or send this form letter for us. So the written letters, as I was trying to say before, they might have different groups of people that decided to do a written letter. So the results that I'm sharing here may not be representative of the comments that we're going to see in the written letters. So I just wanted to, that's why I said in the beginning, grain of salt. These are just comments from these three sources. And there are other sources of comment that are still to be reviewed.
Thank you very much, Nicola. Any other questions for Nicola or Ben Gahagan?
Ray, can I just chime in really quickly on your question? I would say that at least for the Woburn meeting, I knew 5 or 6 recreational anglers who were in attendance. And I think Nicola had kind of like that breakdown in her first slide of number of attendees to number of comments. Only one of those people made a comment. I just think among the recreational community, and this is something that I think that DMF could do, and specifically my program could do a better job of fostering, is that a lot of recreational anglers aren't used to going to these meetings and making comments, and they're a little bit more shy about doing it than maybe some of the for hire and commercial groups who do it a lot more often. I think that's just an education thing that we need to work on, but I do think it should be taken into consideration when you look at, as has been mentioned, a lot of the comments in our public hearings in Massachusetts were dominated by 1 or 2 groups.
Right. Thank you, Ben. I just want to comment to you, along with studying a barbless hook, I would hope DMF or your division would take upon the task of these lures, single hook lure, as opposed to trebles and doubles. It's just a single hook lure. And I would hope that you could incorporate that into your study.
Oh yeah, Ray, we've done that, and I think maybe if Dan would like at some point in a meeting when we have a little less on the agenda, I'd be happy to come in and talk about both the results of the post-release mortality study now that we're wrapping it up, and cover some of the educational work we have been doing and will continue to do.
We're losing audio. We've lost audio.
But I heard Ben fine. So, well, anyway, Ben, this is not really a crazy meeting agenda. I mean, you should attend meetings when we have 3 or 4 action items we have to vote on. But anyways, thank you for your comments, Ben, and your good work, and keep it up. And I really would like to see DMF do a study on these single hook lures. Thank you.
Hey, Ben and Ray, tomorrow, Micah has a pre-planned presentation at the graduate school at SMAST, and I believe it's a publicly accessible
I'll share that, Dan.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, and just to be completely clear, I was just trying to not get down in the weeds. That's Ray, that's something we that's absolutely covered in this study. So I can come, you can watch Micah's presentation tomorrow. We're happy, Micah or myself or both, to come in and give a presentation specifically to the MFAC, which is what I was trying to say. But absolutely, a single hook lure with a single J hook is going to be your lowest post-release mortality way to catch striped bass. Going to the circle hook, J hook, debarbing thing, your baited hooks are your highest mortality, double treble hooks right after that. So going down to a single hook, whether it's a treble or a single, is your best option, and a single J hook is going to be your lowest post-release mortality when it comes to lures or baits.
Well, thank you.
So the study covered that pretty comprehensively, thankfully.
Thank you very much, Ben. But sorry to say, we have to go to Fish Day up on the hill tomorrow. So if there are commission members who aren't going to go to the hill tomorrow, maybe you'll want to look at this presentation by Ben Gahagan and Micah Dean, right?
Ray,
it's recorded.
3 p.m. So it'll be well after Fish Day, and you can listen to it on your phone.
Have you ever
it's also archived, right, Jerry?
What's that, Dan?
It's archived as well, right?
Yes, I believe so.
Oh, so I'll be able to look at that presentation tomorrow night when I get home?
I'll figure out a way to make sure commission members have access to it, either both live and after.
Thank you, Jared. That's certainly appreciated by commission members.
We have one more comment from Ray Jarvis.
Ray, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to kind of echo what Ben Gehagen had said about attendance versus comment. I know, especially at the board meeting and at other meetings that I listen to online, that a lot of the comments were by those experienced attending the meetings, for hire sector guys, commercial guys, and I know personally a lot of people at the board meeting were there, more supporting other measures like proactive measures on this fishery. So and in general, people were just hesitant to comment, either from a lack of experience or for the fact that there would be pushback from the other side. I did see it firsthand at the Bourne meeting where a few people commented and were immediately kind of, you could almost say like heckled in a way. But I think that, it would be worth, like Ben mentioned, just giving people maybe a little bit more confidence to comment at these meetings.
Thank you, Ray. Moving on.
All right, we're gonna
Moving
move on to Menhaden. And just wanted to, you may have seen some news about Menhaden in reference to the recently completed benchmark stock assessment and implications for the future total allowable catches or tax. So the board is going to be reviewing that benchmark stock assessment. It's actually two assessments. It's a single species Menhaden assessment. And then the results of that Menhaden assessment go into the ecosystem assessment, and from which we derive ecological reference points for Menhaden that take into account its role as a forage species. But important to the single species assessment, this was an update, so it's got a couple more years worth of data. But it also included a very key change to the natural mortality, the age-specific natural mortality estimates that are used in it. Kind of an error was found, and so there was some new analysis of the historical tagging data, which is used to generate the natural mortality estimates for Menhaden. And that reanalysis indicated that Menhaden natural mortality is lower than was previously used in the stock assessment. And the effect of this is that it brings down the total biomass estimates of Menhaden. So that's what this graph is showing, is just that over the full time series, the biomass estimates are about 37% lower than what we thought from the previous assessment using these new natural mortality estimates. So that is going to have implications for the total allowable catch, as does how the last assessment in the terminal years was showing kind of a spike upward. You could see that in that yellow line is showing an increase in age 1+ biomass, and you don't see that in the update assessment through 2025. So next slide. So those Menhaden biomass numbers, in addition to biomass for a suite of other what are referred to as ecological reference point species, are incorporated into the larger ecosystem assessment. So the species that are included are herring, dogfish, weakfish, striped bass, and bluefish. And all of them are kind of modeled together, and there's a lot of diet work in that, and it shows like the ecosystem and the trophic relationships between those species. And the ecological reference points for Menhaden use striped bass as the focal species, because striped bass was shown to be the most sensitive to how much Menhaden is removed from the population. And so the reference points, for example, the fishing mortality target and threshold levels are the maximum fishing mortality on Menhaden that can sustain striped bass at either its biomass target or threshold level when striped bass are fished at their target level, and the other 4 ERP species are fished at their current levels. And what the results are showing is that fishing mortality in 2023 was somewhere between the target and threshold F level. And so, next slide. In the prior two cycles that the management board has used these ecological reference points to set the total allowable catches, the TACs have been set to aim for that F target, so that calls for a reduction. And we use probabilities of getting to that, so they've been kind of based on having a 40 to 50% probability of being below the F target. And so if the board used that same type of use the ERP in the same way, it calls for 50% reductions in the Menhaden total allowable catches thereabouts. And so the board will be looking at do we continue to use that ERP F target as what we're aiming for? What probability do we want to assign to getting there? Do we want to phase in the reduction? Do we want to get there in 1 year and have it be a constant TAC for 3 years? So those are the type of specifics that I expect will be discussed. But overall, I think I would be fairly confident to say that there'll be somewhere between a 20 to 50% cut in the coastwide Menhaden TAC next year. So just wanted to note that and say that Massachusetts's quota as a result of a 50% cut, that would bring us to the quota that we operated at pretty much from 2018 to 2022. It's only been the last 3 years that our quota was up to about over 10 million pounds. At 50% cut would bring us back down to 5 million pounds. So fortunately we have capped our permits for the Menhaden fishery and took the additional step this year to remove some additional latent effort from the limited entry permit holders. So at least our permitting is kind of locked down on whatever available quota we end up with for next year. The episodic event set aside will still remain in the plan. So there'll likely be more reliance on that and quota transfers between states if these cuts are approved by the board. Any questions?
Questions for Nicola? I certainly hope commission members have questions, because this is as an important an issue at the upcoming ASMFC meeting as is striped bass.
Chris McGuire.
Chris, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Nicola. Nicola, can you talk about how cuts that are applied, whatever the board comes up with, are applied across the different sectors with reduction and bait? And is that something that is there's a potential of altering as well?
Right. So currently the allocations are state by state. They don't specifically, set a certain amount for bait or the reduction fishery, for example. That is something that the board had considered in the past when it initially made allocations, was how to do it. Do we do it state by state? Are we looking at bait versus reduction, et cetera? So I think that they're with the likelihood of lowering the coastwide quota, I think the board will have some interest in lowering the Chesapeake Bay reduction fishery cap so that it scales down alongside the reduction in the TAC. If that didn't change, then the reduction fishery would, be able to harvest and it would be even more concentrated in Chesapeake Bay potentially. If that weren't reduced, that does take an addendum. The Menhaden agenda does also include a board discussion item on the allocations, because within the fishery management plan, there is a provision that every 3 years, the board will have a kind of a check-in on the allocations and make a decision whether or not they want to reconsider the allocations. So we're at that 3-year check-in at this point. And, you know, if the board wanted to pursue some change to the kind of state by state allocations, some allocation between reduction and bait, that would also take the initiation of an addendum.
Good, Chris?
Well, yeah, just one follow-up. I know that obviously, everybody's always running against the clock. Addendums do addendums have a set number of meetings that they require to complete, or is an addendum something that would be changing quota for like 2 years from now, or what's the pace of those addendums if they were to move forward?
Right, right. So the change to the TAC is made through board specifications. That's not an addendum, but anything that would change like the Chesapeake Bay reduction fishery cap, or that would change the allocations, that would be an addendum, which typically takes at least 2 meetings or maybe 3 meetings to initiate a document, review a draft of it, approve it for public comment, and then have the board take final action on it. So it's usually a minimum of 6 months. I think with the Bay cap issue, there could be potential to kind of fast track that as a single issue for next year, so that it would be reduced at the same time as the TAC being reduced. But if in order for that to be kind of fast tracked, I think it would have to be a pretty simple addendum with a very narrow set of options. And something like allocation is always a very complicated and contentious subject, and I think would, take longer than that. And it would be, a 2027 type issue at least, if the board wanted to pursue that at this point.
Right. Thanks for that.
You're welcome.
Questions for Nicola?
Suki?
Suki,
Yeah.
you're nice.
Yeah, thanks, Ray. Thanks, Jared. Nicola, a couple things. So, talking to fishermen around here that have been in the bait business for like forever, going back to the 80s, I would say, or before that, as far as filming goes, they seem very encouraged by the amount of small fish that are around here this year. They say usually you get the bigger fish up here, but they seem to think that there's so many small fish up here, and I could see that myself in the bait. There was a lot of small pogies up here this year. They usually don't make it up this far, but for some reason they think that the future looks really bright. They're going to be really just devastated by this discussion that's taking place. And as far as the bait reduction versus the omega quota, that's what it is. It's the omega quota. I hate to talk about, reductions for everybody, but it should be across the board. Can't believe that we'd be discussing bait reductions for the whole coast while Omega still maintains, they get the biggest percentage of the pogie fisheries anyway. I can't see how we can go down that road, but again, the guys up here that have been around forever seem to think there's a bright future in the pogies because the size of them is so small up here this year, and they really don't see them up here as heavy as they have been this year. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure I was clear that so if the coastwide TAC is reduced, that filters down into every single state's quota as well. So
Okay.
Virginia's quota would be cut the same amount, and then Virginia within its own rules, it allocates its state quota between its reduction and its bait fishery. That's not something that ASMFC has, told Virginia how to allocate their state quota. But I would expect that, if the Virginia allocation is reduced, then the reduction fishery also has a reduction of the same amount. The Chesapeake Bay reduction fishery cap is an additional tool that just says how much of the reduction fishery allowance that Virginia has, how much of that can come from the Chesapeake Bay waters and how much has to come from outside of Chesapeake Bay.
Yeah, thanks for that. I was a little unclear on that part of it. Again, the lobster fisheries is the most important fisheries on the East Coast by far, employs the most people, creates the most money for the economy on the whole from in New England. But and I read that thing last week about the reduction and the people are crying about the menhaden, I mean the striper fisheries is problems because of the bait, that the menhaden's not available to them like it should be, and the tuna fillet. Same argument I listened to through the heron fisheries. The menhaden is more important to the lobster industry than it is to any other fisheries. I just can't understand why that just never seems to go by the wayside. But hopefully, Maine and Mass, New Hampshire, and Rhode Island will stick up for the lobster industry as far as the bait demand goes, because that's like the last species left in any amount that is available to the lobster fisheries. That's just a comment, you guys can do what you want, but I just can't see the lobster fisheries taking a back seat to everything else like they did in the heron fisheries. Thank you.
Appreciate the comment.
Ray Jarvis.
Ray, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I agree with you, Ray, that this is just as big of an issue. And it's, like Suki said, more far-reaching than just impact on striped bass, but, multiple species and fisheries. And, specifically as a bait fish for the lobster industry, I think there should be some discussion to reallocate from the large omega fleet, the reduction fleet, to the bait fishery. And again, I wouldn't say that I've seen an increase in pogies here in New England, but I would echo what Suki said, where I've seen a lot of small pogies in the area, but I've also seen a lack of larger fish here. So I'm not sure what exactly that means. Maybe a bright future, but maybe not a bright future, considering the lack of big fish. Usually, growing up, I'd see harbors choked with large menhaden. Now we're kind of seeing scattered schools of smaller fish. But I agree that this is an issue of utmost importance, and whatever decisions are made, there should be more far-reaching consideration for other fisheries impacted and other industry like the bait industry. Yeah,
Thank you, Ray. Questions for Nicola?
Not seeing any further questions, we can move on to the next subject.
Nicola, I have a question and comment on that previous slide that you had up. You mentioned that in the menhaden fishery, we're trying to achieve a 40 to 50% probability, and yet in striped bass, we spoke 50 to 60%. How come, why the lack of consideration for menhaden? Why isn't menhaden at a minimum of 50% probability?
Well, so I think it's a little bit reversed here, where in this table where it says a 40% probability of exceeding the ERP target, that's actually better than 50%. You can see how the tacks are lower at 40%.
Right.
So it's just the way that it's kind of phrased, that's actually more like the 60% probability for striped bass. It's just phrased here as 40%.
Yeah, I concur with Suki and Ray Jarvis, being on that working group that we had, with the Chesapeake Bay issue with the osprey.
Mm-hmm.
Even in Virginia, though they take 70% of the overall tack, the state of Virginia, and yes, I think 10% might go to the bait industry in Virginia. My numbers could be wrong, but as I recollect, 10% goes to the bait fishery, because they have crabbers down there in both Maryland and Virginia. Yet the bait industry in Virginia had a lack of menhaden, and they had to go and purchase menhaden from other states for their bait fishery, for their crabbers, which I found concerning. And I want this commission to know that, yes, Suki, you're right. Virginia gets 76% of the TAC, overall TAC. And there is, and I know we don't like discussing it at the table because it gets very political, but I really believe it's time for reallocation. Thank you.
And are you ready to speak again?
Gonna try. As Dan mentioned earlier, the lobster survey results have come in, and we are presenting this next week at ASMFC. So I want to give you a little preview of some of the results. We're also going to be publishing a dashboard on our website this week with these results, so you'll be able to kind of play around with it yourself. And then subsequent to that, we'll deliver an actual report. But in general, we sent out 1,043 surveys. We had around 285. That actually is a little higher now. Results, but around 27% response rate. These were broken down by primarily LMA1 and then sort of somewhat equal representation from the other LMAs. Roughly 60% were not federally permitted and 40% were, and almost all of them were owner-operators. Most of the owners are in the LMA3 fleet. Next slide. So this is, I picked out a couple of the questions just to display some of the results. One of the questions was, I'm just going to read the actual question for you. Hold on. So in considering the future, which of these areas presents the greatest concern for maintaining sustainability of the fleet? And most of the, on the left here, on the list of things were in the list of options that they could check from. There was an other option, and the all of the above were actually other responses as well. But the primary concerns for most individuals were input costs and whale regulations. The next question on the right is about how effective do you believe current conservation measures are in protecting the future of the lobster population? Here, 70% did believe it is effective, with another 19% as neutral, with only the remaining 10%-ish believing it is currently ineffective. Another question was, how informed do you believe you are regarding potential upcoming changes to the regulations affecting the industry? Again, similar responses here, with around 63% saying that they are informed, with another 18% as neutral, with a slightly higher of around 15 to 20% saying they are not informed. Next slide. And this is, this might be a little tricky to see, but these are responses by LMA regarding which the question was, if required to take action by the ASMFC in response to the SOC assessment, what additional conservation measures would you be willing to discuss for your management area? And these responses did differ substantially by LMA, with LMA 1 preferring trap limit decreases and more conservative VNOTCH regulations, with LMA 2 reducing allocations and decreasing the minimum size and potentially seasonal area closures. OCC increasing the minimum size, and LMA 3 also more conservative VNOTCH regulations. So this is just a snapshot of those results. The full report will have more of a analysis of what this means, but I just wanted to give you a brief update to show before we present it to ASMFC next week. It'll be a 5-minute presentation similar to this next week, and then we'll send out the link to the dashboard when it's published at the end of this week.
Yeah, Indiana, if I could weigh in, just want to remind the commission that back in February, when Maine reneged on the age increase, and then New Hampshire followed suit, we they pledged to sort of go to their industry and try to take their temperature on what conservation strategies they would support. And so Maine created a survey. They put it out in July. They've completed it in August. We were just about a month behind. So our survey questions were very, very similar to Maine's. Obviously we had to tweak a few things because some things aren't really relevant in Massachusetts that are relevant in Maine, such as their zone councils, and also the fact that we had 4 different LMAs in the state. Maine does not have any participants in any of the other LMAs. They do have a couple of permit holders who have Area 3 permits in Maine, but they tend to set up as a home port in Gloucester because of the maximum size rules, where Maine has a mandatory 5-inch maximum regardless of where you fish. So anyway, I just want people to know that the impetus for this was to kind of piggyback on Maine's initiative, so that if Maine were to show their results, we would have something comparable from the Massachusetts perspective. Thanks.
All right, Mr. Chair, I'm not seeing any further comments, so I'll pull the agenda.
Please do. I'd like to thank Nicola and Anna for their presentations. So, I think we're going to take a 10-minute break before we hear from Melanie on federal fisheries management updates.
Sounds good.
10 minutes, Jared.
Okay.
Put us on the clock.
11:04.
Thank you.
We'll resume at 11:04.
Thank you, Dan.
Right. Thank you.
Well, once again, I'd like to reconvene the commission meeting. And I guess Kelly is going to speak on behalf of Melanie. So, Kelly, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and hello, commissioners. I'm going to be providing the regional fisheries update today. Melanie is down in New Bedford, leading advisory panel and committee meetings for scallops as we work through the framework action for scallops.
Just a second, honey.
Can you hear me okay, by the way?
Yes.
774.
Okay, great. I'm going to go over some of the actions taken at the last council meeting, which was at the end of September in Gloucester, and also preview a little bit of what's coming up for the December council meeting. Next slide, Jarrett. One of the first orders of business every September is for the council to first swear in any new members and also to elect their officers for this year. Dan Salerno of New Hampshire was previously vice chair, and he was elected to the chair position. He'd been serving as chair since Rick Bellavance termed out, had stepped down. Newly appointed vice chair is Melanie Griffin of DMF. This was really a great recognition of her significant contributions to the council over the years. It's really exciting to see her appointed to vice chair. She's been serving in a leadership role already on several fronts, including on the executive committee. So to fill out that executive committee for this year, it's the chair, vice chair, as well as John Paul Pilardo and Megan Ware. They've been serving on the executive committee alongside Melanie for a while, but newly added to the elected to the executive committee was Michael Peardnock, former commission member, who left the commission to serve on the New England Fishery Management Council. Next slide. One of the first action items that was up for council consideration in September was a decision making on whether to adopt the omnibus management flexibility amendment. This amendment was really kind of considered by Executive Director O'Keefe as a way to kind of help with uncertainty in this time when there's decreasing federal capacity to support scientific and regulatory processes, just continued pauses and advancements of the council's actions that have been approved. They're not being implemented in the schedule. And as you probably are aware of, just like continuing delays or reductions in the scientific as well as assessment and other NOAA staff, like NOAA support systems that really guide and help fisheries management decisions at the council level. So to help kind of respond to those changing regional resources, the council is looking for a little more flexibility and a little more consistency across its fishery management plans. The options within the document that were approved by the council in September include allowing for fishery specification frequencies to be now up to 5 years for each of the FMPs. This isn't, normally they're more in the 1, 2, or 3 year range where fishery specifications are set for. This action will now allow that to be up to 5 years, but not require it. So the council can still opt for a shorter timeline for specifications. It also added an option in for specifications action to be developed for groundfish and monkfish. This, instead of having to do a more complicated framework or amendment to support fishery specifications. A couple of the other options were allowing in-season adjustment within that fishery specification period. If the council seems that's necessary, new information comes about and an in-season action can be taken. Previously, this was only in the regulations for Atlantic herring. And also for some of the FMPs, they had an annual review, like a fishery performance report or a fishery monitoring report due every year. So this frees up some council staff time. Instead of developing that on an annual basis, they can do that when the council feels it's necessary. There's some decision making coming forward. It's just a better allocation of resources. So this action was approved and the council's hoping for it to be implemented for this next fishing year. However, that's pending no approval like all the council actions. Next slide. The council did in September adopt fishery specifications for monkfish and skates, and I just wanted to highlight a couple of interesting things with this one. Monkfish are usually done on a 3-year cycle and skates every 2. This is every 6. So every 6 years, these fishery specifications align, and this was one of those years. This past year, I sat on both of these committees, and it's really helpful when the specification timing aligns because particularly the gillnet component of both of these fisheries really overlap in the southern New England area. Both they're the same participants and they may target monkfish and skates at different seasons, but it's really helpful to hear from the advisors and to discuss as a committee together, like whether measures or changes to management might impact one or the other. One of the good things about that flexibility action that the council approved is that they were actually able to utilize that and increase the specification period for skates. So for both monkfish and skates, 3-year specifications were defined and approved. The other interesting bit about this was these were the first stocks the council considered catch advice based on a data update. So in the fall, management track assessments were supposed to have taken place for both of these FMPs, and those were both canceled. The council will be having a series of other stocks in this scenario. A data update is really, there's no assessment update at all involved in that. It's really a really simplistic view of catch and any additional survey indices specifically from the bottom trawl survey. So no additional survey indices that might be otherwise part of an assessment update. And then just to go over the specifications, just for monkfish, status quo, catch limits and effort controls. So days at sea and possession limits were adopted for both the northern and southern areas. And for the skate complex, this is 7 different skate species. With the way that those control rules work, there was an ability to take advantage of a little increase that was really due to winter skate abundance. That's the biomass of winter skate is higher than the other 6 species in the complex, and so this allowed for a little bit of an increase in the catch limits there, and also modest possession limit increases for both the wing and bait fisheries this year. Advisors really cautioned against doing anything beyond a small increase because there's a really marked impact on skate prices if too many are landed at once. So next slide. The council took final action on a revised Amendment 25. They approved this revised version of Amendment 25. And if you recall, a year ago, the council had approved the original Amendment 25. This was one of the first and critical pieces of that Atlantic cod management transition plan. Amendment 25 really was moving the former two-stock units, Gulf of Maine and Georges Bank, and then in the FMP changed in the language to be able to utilize those 4 cod stock units that are defined in the colors in the figure on the right. That was approved and submitted in the council by the council, and then in May the council heard back that Amendment 25 was disapproved, and in particular, if they wanted to be reconsidered, they would need to incorporate cod-specific fishery management measures from Framework 69, which was this sort of associated action identifying fishery specifications for all of the groundfish stocks for fishing years 2025 through 2027. So Framework 69 had been approved by the council in December, and they're still awaiting any word on that. But what they did know they needed to do was pull those cod-specific measures from Framework 69 and put it in that revised 25. So there was no new council decision-making in this revision. It was really just a resorting of where those where that information was contained, so that those cod-specific measures included things like status determination criteria, stock-specific catch limits, the recreational sub-ACLs, accountability measures, and pieces like that. Although Framework 69 is still pending, the council is going ahead and developing Framework 72, which will be for all the groundfish stocks specifications starting in fishing year 2026. So right now, obviously, without any approved fishery specifications, the fishery is still operating, and that is because of an emergency measures that were in place that came through from the regional administrator. Those emergency measures from last year were set to expire in mid-October. On October 3rd, NOAA Fisheries announced that those measures were extended. The current measures in place are extended through April 30th. So I guess we'll just wait and see to find out if the other specifications come through ahead of that deadline. Next slide. Okay, one of the non-typical items on the September agenda was was regarding essential fish habitat and updated designations for EFH. This is something the council's tasked with, updating these EFH designations. And this really reflects a tremendous amount of work from the New England Council and Mid-Atlantic Council working together on designations that would be coordinated throughout the region. The current EFH designations use data only through 2005. So this really represents a big move forward using species distribution modeling. And the data sets behind the work are from 2000 to 2022, so much more recent information on distributions and habitat needs, both in the nearshore areas as well as offshore areas. And those are all by life history stage as the data were available for adults, juveniles, eggs, and larvae. So the species considered in this round were cod, herring, the 7-6 skate species in the complex, and monkfish. And any remaining council species will be considered in the next 2 years as they are able to. Next slide. And this is just a graphic to kind of illustrate those updates with the new modeling. The left side panel, these are all for juvenile Atlantic cod. So the current EFH, what it looks like is that far left side panel. The middle panel is what the new EFH for juvenile Atlantic cod would look like. If this is ultimately approved through NOAA, it's pending approval there. And then one of the really great advances that the public or action agencies, so where EFH comes into play is that action agencies, if a action is to take place within an EFH for a species and it may have negative impacts, NOAA Fisheries in particular will look at that. It will trigger consultation, and the EFH conservation recommendations that NOAA Fisheries comes up with rely on some of this information, so that action agency can go in and look at a much higher level of detail. Now you can see in that right side panel, the 20th quantile would really represent like core habitat area for a species in that life history stage. And the ultimate EFH outlined is that 75th quantile. Okay, I can answer more about this later if you think, but we'll move on. Oh, on that last side too, I just wanted to let you know that there's a public tool you can go in and play and view these different new EFH designations for all the different species. That's at the listed on the page there. Okay, thanks. Next slide. One of the more controversial items on the September agenda was regarding final action on the Omnibus Alternative Gear Marking Framework. So this is an action that was being led by GARFO, NOAA Fisheries Regional Office, but both New England and Mid-Atlantic Councils also being on there. This action was the purpose of the action was what would ultimately be to allow an alternative to the current surface gear marking rules. So allowing something alternative to buoys and high flyers for the fixed gear fisheries that the council manages. If the council adopted alternatives in this framework, then the plan on the GARFO side would be to consider adopting those measures in the federal lobster regulations. And one of the functional results of the action that GARFO explained was to kind of move away from the need to issue exempted fishing permits for any of this on-demand gear use or testing. If there was any sort of a scaling up of on-demand use, the resources needed to kind of administer these EFPs is just kind of unsustainable. So the council heard a lot through written comment, as well as sought input from its advisory panels on this topic to inform decision-making ahead of final action. They also heard from the ASMC Lobster Board wrote a letter indicating that supporting a postponement of final action on this. Pretty much everybody was in agreement that, well, I guess not entirely, but the bulk of comment really leaned toward putting out this request for information ahead of to help inform decision making ahead of taking any final actions on changing these alternative surface gear marking rules. And that is what the council decided in September. So the plan on the regional office side is to put out this really comprehensive request for information on on-demand topics. They mentioned having already a 12-page list of questions that are in there, adding to that. Maybe we'll see that come out in the Federal Register in January. That's kind of a guess, but that's what they had indicated. And as you can see in the picture on the right, there was probably nearly 150 lobster industry representatives in the room, just speaking on this issue, and also just to share their concern over moving ahead too quickly on this topic. There's really strong concerns about the unknowns and whether
on cost, safety, liability of gear damage during potential gear conflict, and just the lack of direct involvement from the lobster industry. There was just a lot more to kind of gather information on before making this decision, and the council agreed on that. Suki was definitely there, and a lot of our other cooperative lobster research participants. One of the other topics was approval. The council did approve the on-demand gear conflict working group's report. This is the second report that the working group produced. This was on recommendations for reducing gear conflict with lobster and other fisheries. The first report they produced last year was on gillnet and other trap pot. If anyone is interested in looking at those recommendation reports that were part of that working group's terms of reference, we'll be happy to share those. Next slide. And the last topic I kind of wanted to cover was a bit of the preview. Scallop specifications will be on the December agenda to finalize fishery specifications for 2026. Unfortunately, we're looking at a poor resource status for scallops relative to how it has been, at least in the last, I don't know, 10 years or so. Exploitable biomass is at a historic low. There were really declines. These surveys are done on an annual basis, and there's dredge and optical surveys in each of the areas. So there's a lot of, much of which is funded through the research set-aside program, so industry funded work. And so a great deal of survey goes into finding out biomass and abundance trends each year. Declines were seen across Georges Bank in both the closed areas 1 and 2. I guess the one positive was that some growth and better survival was seen in the mid-Atlantic, but the overall biomass there is much reduced from years past. In general, a little more than half of the biomass is in Georges Bank, and then still less than 10% is in the Gulf of Maine, but that percentage does keep creeping up relative to the rest of the resource area. Overall, there was really no notable signs of recruitment, only a couple like hotspots that were very small in geographic size. And then the 2026 catch limits will really be the lowest in over a decade, dropping even further from the low numbers last year. Next slide. And then just to speak a little bit about the Gulf of Maine component of the resource, there is a consistent moderate decline in biomass across the Gulf of Maine as well. These kind of show this figure shows where surveys take place and where the exploitable biomass was present. An interesting bit is that there was a decline in the large scallop seen on Stellwagen, including in the area that's closed, the Western Gulf of Maine closure area. So it was a bit of a natural mortality issue, not just fishing or anything. There's some modest recruitment seen on Ipswich and Stellwagen, but those won't be available to the fishery till at least 2028. Next slide. So for this Framework 40 specifications development, what the measures the council is considering are some pieces are typical where where rotational area fishing for the limited access fleet will take place. One of the remarkable differences this year is that typically there are rotational areas open each year. This year there's a good possibility there's no rotational area trips open at all. Right now there's definitely going to be, there's none in the alternatives to Georges Bank area 2. There's a possibility of a partial trip to closed area 1. So that will be a really big difference. And then the other piece for the limited access fleet is like where open bottom fishing can take place, and that's set through days at sea allocation. The days at sea set for this year was 24, just for reference. The alternatives under consideration are considering somewhere in the 18 to 36 day range, and that will kind of hinge on whether there is an open area for rotational fishing or not. These actions always consider areas to protect recruitment, and unfortunately, as I mentioned a minute ago, there wasn't really any great areas of recruitment. Nantucket Lightship will remain closed. That was one of the hotspots. And then there's some recruitment noted in the New York Bight area. That was 2 years ago. There was a closure box there, but that one's that one is an option, but it's a little complicated because there is quite a bit of exploitable biomass in that area. So it'll be a trade-off the council considers as to whether to close that or close that to protect the recruits, or keep it open as a source of exploitable biomass. And then as these complicated measures are being considered, it's already a tight timeline between the conclusion of the 2025 surveys and the end of the summer, and trying to analyze those results and then start to develop, the appropriate fishing alternatives. It's already a tight timeline without a shutdown, and since the federal government has been shut down since October 1st, the spatial area management model hasn't been able to run with these different iterations that the committee would like to see. So the committee will be making some decisions based on all the information the technical team has to bring forward, but not including probably those spatial area management runs. I don't know, there's a series of meetings today and tomorrow, and then another set in November, and it's unclear right now, obviously, whether there'll be more details at that time. Okay, next slide. Just highlighting a few meetings. This is a wrap up. The December council meeting will be in Newport. There'll be final action on scallops, groundfish, and spiny dogfish. And in addition, the council will be considering its work priorities for 2026. Much of those are already kind of defined, both through things that council will be required to do, like the fishery specifications, and also multi-year work that was identified through those suite of IRA initiatives that the council is taking part in. Say they've hired contractors for several of them, and then so some of that work will be continuing on. There'll be a small amount of discretionary items considered by the council to take on it new in 2026, or to revisit things that had been put on pause to address executive orders or the revisions to Amendment 25 at groundfish, etc. Next slide. This is the last slide. This just shares some of the meeting dates for upcoming meetings. If you're interested in attending, you just visit the council's website and there'll be a webinar link. A couple of them are in person. But I'm happy to take any questions. And I do think Jared included a summary of the September meeting as well, which has all the links to the council documents if you're interested.
Thank you, Kelly. Questions for Kelly?
Not seeing any hands raised, Mr. Chair.
Thank you for your presentation, Kelly.
We do have Suki.
Suki, you're recognized.
Yeah, thank you. Just comments. I don't really have any questions for Kelly. I just, we got a good turnout of lobstermen at this meeting. I mean, it's questionable whether the council should be making any decisions on anything involved in the lobster industry, but that's gonna hang out there for a while, I guess. And yeah, I haven't seen Tony Kearns, and I don't normally see her, but I'd like to thank her. Maybe Ray and Dan can thank her for the lobster industry. I think she did a real good job of bringing up the issues that the lobster industry is, having with buoyless fishing type of thing, and from the Atlantic States point of view about how much the council should get involved in any regulations involving, lobster fishing. And I think she swayed the council more than the intimidating crowd that was in the room, because I don't think the council's seen that kind of a turnout at any of the meetings by lobstermen or fishermen in a long, long time, if ever. So again, Tony did a real good job of bringing up the issues that everybody has with buoyless fishing. I'd like to publicly thank her for that. Other than that, we see this buoyless fishing regulation change is just one step down a slippery slope, and we tried to stop it, but they just postponed it. So we'll see how it goes in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Suki. Dan, can you address Suki's question? Why the feds are involved, why the council's involved?
Yeah, there are two rules on the federal books that are conflicted. The rule under FACMA says, or I don't know, I guess it's Magnuson. Under Magnuson says, it dictates how you mark your buoys. Obviously, you have to have buoys in order to mark them, right? That's an old rule going back probably 30 years. Now, here comes a new rule about 5 or 10 years ago under the Marine Mammal Protection Act that says that in areas that are closed to protect right whales, you can basically fish on-demand gear. And it's like, well, wait a minute, something's got to give here because these two rules are in conflict. So NOAA Fisheries is saying we've got to change one of these rules because right now both rules are on the book and they're conflicted. So that's what they were trying to accomplish. Because the net result is they have to write experimental fishing permits for anybody who is using anything except a buoy line on each end of a lobster trawl. And with the federal government losing about a third of their resources in the last year, there's fewer people available to be issuing those letters of authorization or experimental fishing permits. So that's the reason NOAA feels that they have to get on the field on this one. And as you know, Ray, the commission, the ASMFC, is saying, hey, NOAA Fisheries and Council, you need to engage with the lobster fishery. So, I hope that there'll be something at the MLA weekend, and I hope there'll be something maybe at the Maine Fishermen's Forum to just explain this feature of it. So that's my take.
Thank you, Dan. Any other questions?
Not seeing any other hands raised, Mr. Chair.
Okay, so now we're back to the shellfish program update.
Yes. Chrissy, if you're around, I will stop my share so that you can share your screen.
Okay, my computer has been revolting on me lately, so hopefully this works fine. Are you able to see?
Yes. See it?
Okay, are you able to see the presentation view?
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
It's the user view, Chrissy, not the presenter view.
It's user view. Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing. Let me just share the screen that it's going to. Okay, now it should be presenter view.
Now it's presentation mode, correct?
Okay, thank you very much. Sorry, I know we're already over time for this discussion, so I'll try to move quickly. So for the outline, the first few 4 or so, I'm actually just going to stay on this slide and just give you a quick little update. Then we'll go on to ISSC, Vibrio, Campylobacter, CSO closures, wastewater treatment plant outfall modeling and the reclassifications, our laboratory, and then just some general notes on the federal shutdown. For personnel, we've actually calmed down a little bit. You may, in other updates, recall that the shellfish program has had a tremendous amount of turnover over the last couple of years. We've been able to hire some amazing new ambitious young people. They're doing a great job, have a great work ethic. This gentleman on the left here in this photo, he was a long-term 40-year employee that retired a little over a year ago. We were able to bring him back part-time to help us with some field work, particularly sampling areas that require access with boats. And so we're happy to have John helping us. We've also been able to hire a part-time contractor to work in the New Bedford laboratory because we only have 2 full-time staff operating that laboratory, and one is about to go out on maternity leave any day now. So we're grateful to have that part-time staff person. But if we're being honest, that lab during normal conditions really needs 3 people. So we're advocating for a 3rd laboratory person in the New Bedford lab. Another program in the shellfish, another project in the shellfish program that is understaffed is aquaculture. Aquaculture has been a 2-man show for a long time. As you know, cultured oysters are the 3rd most valuable fishery product landed in the state. And one of those 2 has been on personal leave. So poor Alex, our project lead, has been treading water and sometimes feels underwater. So I'm also advocating for getting a 3rd full-time employee dedicated to aquaculture for the state. Dan had alluded to the MSOA Constable training course when he was talking about Henry Lynn's nomination for the Belding Award. That is something that Matt Camisa is leading the charge with. Matt's our South Shore Shellfish Program leader, and he's herding all the cats. We have a very ambitious goal of getting this constable training course together and offered through Cape Cod Community College for the January spring semester. So thanks, Matt, for all your hard work working with the MSOA to try to make this happen. I know you've had a lot of updates, over the last couple years regarding our depuration plant and depuration harvest. As you know, our depuration plant was pretty much lost to coastal erosion. We were able to reopen with an MOU with Maine and Spinney Creek, a private depuration facility in Maine, in Elliott, Maine. So we have just one master digger who has resumed depuration harvest. He's primarily harvesting in the Merrimack River area, and with about a handful of subordinate diggers. I just wanted to quickly mention the whole sea scallop harvest issue. Whole sea scallops according to the National Shellfish Sanitation Program, should not be harvested in areas that the feds have designated as controlled access. And that's most of Georges Bank and any of the areas that may be impacted by paralytic shellfish poisoning biotoxins. But the feds have failed to actually publish any maps of what they designated controlled harvest. So we need to wait for the federal government to reopen, and then we're going to ask for some clarification. But technically, any whole sea scallops or even row-on sea scallops that are harvested in federal waters are supposed to be done under controlled access with restricted harvest tags. And there's supposed to be an MOU between the harvester and the dealer and the NOAA and the state that's receiving the landing. So there's a lot that needs to be worked out here. But right now, the feds need to come to the table because there's a lot of uncertainty. Okay, for the ISSC, I know this is a busy slide with lots of language. I just figured for new people, we're going to make the slides available. The National Shellfish Sanitation Program, or NSSP, is what dictates much of our framework for managing shell fisheries in Massachusetts. Any state that wants their shellfish to enter interstate commerce has to agree to and conform with the standards of the NSSP and their shellfish guide, or the model ordinance section of this guide. So the ISSC, or Interstate Shellfish Conference, is this group of people of state shellfish authorities, the federal government, so FDA, NOAA, and also industry partners who get together every 2 years at the Interstate Shellfish Sanitation Conference. It's basically a congress to develop the standards that we're all going to adhere by for shellfish and in-state commerce. And so this on the right, you see the most recent version, which was from the 2023 ISSC. And so it typically meets every 2 years. We were expected to have one this year. In fact, this week, we were supposed to be in Colorado at the 2025 ISSC, going through proposals and revisions for the current shellfish standards. But due to uncertainty with the federal government, they thought it best to push that, which was a wise decision. And so the last we had heard was they were going for May of 2026 in Nashville, Tennessee. But the most recent ISSC executive board meeting pushed it even further. So now we're targeting January 2027 for the next ISSC meeting, which will then consider new proposals and potential revisions to the standards that we have to adhere to. In Massachusetts, 3 agencies represent the shellfish control authorities that are responsible for complying with the NSSP. It's DMF, our shellfish program specifically, the Department of Public Health, it was Food Protection Program. I think I need to update this slide. I believe they just changed their name recently, and Mass Environmental Police. The FDA annually evaluates our conformance with the NSSP model ordinance, and one area where we've had a deficiency for years now that we're working on and have an MOU or MOA with our lawyers is that when different agencies in a state are responsible for enforcing and complying with different sections of the model ordinance, we're supposed to have an MOA or memorandum of agreement that outlines all the sections that the specific agency is responsible for. So we're working on getting rid of that deficiency. And now that MEP has new leadership, we're going to want to revisit that soon. The Vibrio control plan. So I think anybody who's familiar with oysters in Massachusetts knows that there's a pretty robust Vibrio control plan that applies just to market size oysters. And the vast majority of the Vibrio control plan has to do with controlling temperature post-harvest. So as soon as it is harvested, we want them to be cooled. It should be immediate cooling. We require 2 hours to be on either in a ice slurry or packed on ice. In some areas like Katama Bay on the Vineyard and the Plymouth Duxbury Kingston area, they only have 1 hour to icing during the highest temperature months. Vibrio being a fast growing bacteria with during periods of high temperature. Last year, we had 40 confirmed Vibrio illnesses. What a confirmed Vibrio illness means is that somebody ate oysters, got sick, went to the hospital took a stool sample, and they got a positive identification of Vibrio in their stool. Of those 40, 23 cases were single source. And what that means is when the epidemiologists do their investigation and they ask what their, where they ate the oysters, and then it gets traced back from the restaurant to the dealer, ultimately to the harvester. It can be traced back to a single growing area or area of hydrographically connected growing areas. So for the purposes of single trace back, you can look at this table on the top right, CCB 11, CCB 13, CCB 14, that's all in Wellfleet, and they're considered one area in terms of counting illnesses to a single source. Same thing with the Plymouth Kingston Duxbury area. They would be considered all a single source. Even technically, there are several shellfish growing area designations in that area. DH and EMF have had this matrix for many years now. In this bottom plot here, this bottom table, set of tables shows just basically the matrix that guides our decisions. And so you probably cannot see my mouse, right? No. So Massachusetts has instituted a precautionary closure when we have 4 cases within a 30-day period. This is not something that's mandated by the NSSP, but it's something we've instituted because often if you get 4 cases, you're likely to get the 5th, which brings us into the mandatory 14-day closure. And if we start with a 7-day precautionary closure and we do hit that 5th illness, we can count time served. And so it becomes a little less impactful, it seems, to the industry because we can slow down the illnesses by starting the closure, the precautionary closure, where we're not having harvest. It slows down the illnesses. Maybe we don't even get that 5th illness. And if we do get it, we aren't starting from that point with the 14-day closure. So this past summer, we had several areas that had quite a few illness cases. And this top plot, this top table, I'm just showing the number of confirmed illnesses that were single source. Many of these areas were also implicated in multi-source, which means we could not hone it into a single shellfish growing area. A lot of times restaurants will give an oyster medley because they want to try a Wellfleet oyster and a Duxbury oyster and a PEI oyster. And in that case, we have no idea which oyster made them sick. So we call that a multi-source, and we can't trace it back to one single growing area. Many of these areas listed in this table are also implicated in multi-source illnesses. And so because we had a very active year, we were at a point where specifically in SC 61, we reached the threshold for the 4 cases within 30 days for a precautionary closure. Duxbury, Plymouth, Kingston area was very, very close, and we had several illnesses that were still being traced back. And we were right up against the Labor Day holiday. So DMF made the call to issue the precautionary closure in the hopes that we could kind of get through this and reopen for Labor Day weekend. And it was somewhat of a challenge. There was some inconsistency with DPH, and there was a delay in us issuing the closure. So we may be, the Vibrio working group this year may be looking toward getting rid of the precautionary closure, because if we can't be nimble with it, it doesn't really serve a purpose. So that's just something you should know, and industry should know that, you know, if they like this buffer, it might be something we want feedback on. CCB 45 had the 4, SC 61 had the 5. Those were the 2 areas that had precautionary closures this summer due to Vibrio. The closure in Duxbury, I believe, Duxbury, Plymouth, Kingston was 8 days. The closure in the Pleasant Bay system was 15 days. Another issue we're having is Campylobacter illness. Campylobacter is another type of bacteria that can be found in the natural environment. Where oysters are concerned, its vector is assumed to be birds floating and pooping on floating oyster gear. And that's something that the NSSP has really taken an interest in. We now have to have bird deterrents on all floating aquaculture gear. We've had a big ramp up in Campylobacter illnesses investigations this year. Some of them ended up being from out-of-state oysters, but there were 3 outbreaks linked to Massachusetts harvest areas. One on the Vineyard where we had 8 illnesses. We had another in Plymouth from the Saquesh area. We had another outbreak that implicated several areas, but they were all the same restaurant. And it's the same restaurant that had the Campylobacter illness last year when we closed down Yarmouth, Lewis Bay and Yarmouth and Barnstable. And so we decided it's most likely post-harvest contamination or cross-contamination happening at this restaurant rather than the oysters actually being the problem. So that helped in not being able to close. The Vineyard, we ended up having to close while we did some testing. And Plymouth, we got a little bit of a heads up. So Alex was able to get some samples early and before DPH finished their investigation. Once DPH's investigation is finished and the outbreak implicates a growing area, if we can't do the investigation within 24 hours, we're supposed to close it. The challenge with Campylobacter is that there is no standard. The FDA employs a presence-absence zero tolerance for this particular pathogen, and there is not an easy way to sample for it. Last year, when we closed Lewis Bay, we ended up utilizing the Rhode Island Public Health Lab that gave us presence absence, and it ended up being very difficult. It was a closure that lasted over a month. And right now, FDA seems to be okay with us just testing fecal material, which is presumably how it gets into the oysters if it is from the oysters. So if we have non-detect on fecal, we are making the assumption that oysters weren't the cause of this illness. Campylobacter is in the top 3 in terms of pathogens that cause foodborne illness in the United States. And the vast majority of those illnesses are eating raw or undercooked chicken or cross-contamination with juices from raw or undercooked chicken. So we do believe that most of these are probably cross-contamination issues with poultry. Another hot button topic is combined sewer overflow closures. The Buzzards Bay area Particularly, we have one grower in Apponeganset Bay in Dartmouth and several growers in Nascatucket Bay area in Fairhaven and Mattapoisett. They are being impacted in a tremendous way due to New Bedford CSOs. We haven't always closed because we have only recently, Massachusetts only recently has this regulation that DEP enacted to require mandatory notification with 2 hours, and it not only not a notification that the CSOs are going off, but volumes. And so since we've been getting those and sampling them, we now are aware of much larger volumes than we ever imagined were coming out of these CSOs, and we're having to enact closures based on diluting those large volumes. So this map on the right shows the red dot for all the CSOs. I believe there's 26 CSOs all discharging from New Bedford into New Bedford Harbor and Clark's Cove. Last year, the Apponeganset Bay area and grower was closed over 200 days. This year, he's up to 133. The Fairhaven and Mattapoisett growers are up to 47 days closed this year. Last year, if you've seen any of Dale Levitt's presentations, he was closed every major holiday in that year, every single one. And so it's an issue. Actually, I'm going to go back because we have additional closures right now due to the storm that we just had that they're rain related, but not CSO related. So right now, Plymouth and Kingston is still closed due to that rain event. And that has to do with runoff from land following the heavy rainfall, especially following a long, a long period of drought. So contaminants were able to build up on the land surfaces. And then we just had a really big pulse of contaminants with this last storm. And so we're finding it difficult to get areas open. We're testing. There are also areas that are seasonally closed in the summer and they're getting ready to open, and they're a test to reopen. And we're finding that a lot of areas are having water quality issues and we can't open right now. Plymouth is being impacted by that. Plymouth is not open yet. And I know there are Plymouth growers that were planning to contribute to Seafood Day or Ag Day tomorrow that are not going to be able to, because now we're not going to get test results for the second round of testing until tomorrow afternoon, probably at the earliest. So there are impacts due to the rainfall that are outside of CSOs as well. Another big topic that the Shellfish Program has been dealing with is the wastewater treatment plant outfalls. We're required to have dilution closed safety zones around these outfalls. And we've been using a modeler out of SMAST, Dr. Chen, to do so. There's been a lot of concern. This image on the right is Chen's video of the Fairhaven and New Bedford model and where the effluent goes. And so there was a lot of outcry from industry about these closures. We got some assistance from Woods Hole Sea Grant. They facilitated a peer review of our use of Chen's model to inform classification decisions around wastewater treatment plants. And basically the reviewers agreed that the modeling framework was appropriate, but considering that we're making these management decisions, they recommended further validation, observations, and testing for the model, which is certainly appropriate to increase public confidence in the model results. Due to budget uncertainty, it's not clear whether any additional modeling work will be completed this year. And we do have word that we have potentially 2 new ocean outfalls going into Massachusetts, one in Falmouth and one in the Wareham area. I'm almost done here. Quickly, the laboratories, I mentioned we have some need for additional staff in New Bedford, but we're also in the process of updating methods. So we were in a pickle because the depuration plant was the only laboratory FDA certified to conduct MSC testing, and MSC is the only tool we have to open these CSO closures sooner than 21 days. And so we were in a hurry to get these labs validated, doing method verifications and FDA evaluated to perform these methods. Jake is the gentleman in this picture. He's the leader of our lab in Gloucester, and we now have Gloucester approved to conduct MSC. We're working on we've submitted the report for the New Bedford lab, but as you know, the government shutdown has impacted that. Another big initiative is we're still killing mice to monitor for biotoxins in shellfish. And so we received some state funding to get some HPLC. It's this black instrument with the doors next to the plate on the lower right. And so we're working on getting method verifications for that and becoming proficient in that method so that we can start to sunset the mouse bioassay and we don't have to be injecting mice. And then lastly, federal government shutdown impact. So there was the delayed FDA review and decision on the MSC for the New Bedford lab. We have a control of harvest program element evaluation. It was scheduled for the first week in October. That was postponed. That particular program element evaluation is mostly on MEP, but also on birds on floating aquaculture. So they're looking to make sure that we're implementing bird deterrence. All ISSC committee meetings are on hold and the shellfish specialists are unavailable to us. And so with that, I'll take any questions.
Questions from commission members for Chrissy?
Not seeing any hands raised, Mr. Chair.
Well, Chrissy, I guess you get a pass. Hopefully you'll have your meeting next January out in Hawaii.
Won't hold my breath on that one, but thank you.
Thank you, Chrissy, for your presentation. So, need an agenda once again.
We can move on to the last presentation on offshore wind.
Oh, okay. You had a question mark by that. Oh, fine. Offshore wind update.
All right, Jared, are you okay sharing this one for me?
I am, Brad.
All right, my audio is okay?
You sound good to me.
All right. Well, apologies to anybody who has seen this recently. I have updated it with publicly available information as of last week about the progress of our offshore wind projects. Next slide, please. So in the Northeast, we have South Fork Wind in purple there that is completed and fully operational. We have Vineyard Wind, Revolution Wind, Sunrise Wind, and Empire Wind in the New York Bight that are currently under construction, which includes installation of jacket or monopile foundations, wind turbines, offshore substations, cable burials. There are other projects that are in the planning and permitting phase and even further away, pre-COP phases that not much is going on right now due to the climate from the federal government. Next slide, please. So specific to the 4 projects that we have under construction, we have Vineyard Wind 1, which is 62 turbines. They have all of their towers and foundations installed. They are currently installing towers, nacelles, blades. They're replacing blades from the faulty manufacturer and commissioning turbines as we speak, and they have less than a dozen turbines left to go. It's expected that they can be fully operational this year, and it sounds like they may be transmitting electricity from up to half of their turbines already. Empire Wind in the Hudson Canyon area just recently completed all of their foundation and transition piece installations. They are currently installing subsea rock and scour protection around those foundations, and they will begin turbine installation in the spring. Next slide, please. The 2 Ørsted projects in the Massachusetts, Rhode Island wind energy area are Revolution and Sunrise. They're south of Rhode Island. Revolution Wind was the wind project that had a BOEM stop work order implemented in August. A DC judge issued a preliminary injunction September 22nd, and work began on that project again that day. They are currently installing wind turbines. Both of their offshore substations are installed. They're commissioning the second one right now. They're doing seabed preparations and intercable array installations as we speak, and they have maybe about 15 turbines left to install. Their sister project to the south is Sunrise Wind. They are currently installing monopile foundations, and they have their offshore substation already installed, and it's being commissioned as we speak right now as well. Next slide. In the Gulf of Maine, we have 4 lease areas that were awarded last year. The 2 in purple are Avangrid projects. We have seen their communications plans. The 2 in green are Invenergy. Their communications plans are expected sometime in the next month, and we've been holding internal meetings with them. These will be floating offshore wind projects. Next slide, please. And so that's the update on existing projects. Another project we are working on right now internally is the Massachusetts Fisheries Innovation Fund. This is a fund that was set up initially by the Vineyard Wind Mitigation Fund that was $1.75 million, initially to support programs and projects that ensure safe and profitable fishing continues as current and future offshore wind projects are developed. We had a meeting with the advisory panel of this fund back in May. We narrowed down the priorities of for the first solicitation to be fishing innovation, community, and safety. We released that solicitation for funding back in July. It closed at the end of August, and we ended up receiving 20 proposals that sought $3.37 million in funding. We're currently in the review phase, and I hope to get our reviewers together in early November to recommend proposals worthy of funding to the trustee of the fund, which is Director McKiernan. I hope to then award or announce awardees in November, work on statements of work and contracts in November, and then the projects can begin in January. And the last slide, please. And one other project we're working on, Mass DMF and Mass CZM are working really closely with some Rhode Island partners, Rhode Island DEM, CRMC, Rhode Island URI Sea Grant, as well as Commercial Fisheries Center of Rhode Island and Rhode Island Commercial Fisheries Research Foundation. We've been kind of pooling our skill sets and positions to work on smaller issues like boulder relocation and seabed alterations. We have a working group that meets monthly. Actually, our meeting is this afternoon at 1 o'clock for this month. We've been identifying the issues and knowledge gaps, creating action items, and selecting our content experts to work on specific things, developing projects, refining some methodologies, and identifying funding sources for specific issues that impact fisheries and benthic habitats that we can solve together. And then one final thing, 2 weeks ago, prior to the marine tech surge in Narragansett, we had an East Coast, West Coast learning exchange that Rhode Island Sea Grant hosted. Excuse me. I was a participant along with some Rhode Island DEM, Rhode Island CFRF, CFCRI, New Bedford Port Authority, Sea Grant folks from Rhode Island, New Hampshire, Maine, Delaware. And then our West Coast participants were Oregon and California Sea Grant folks, OSU staff, Pacific Coast Shellfish Growers Association, Blue Lake Rancheria, and Oregon Department of Land and Conservation. We met essentially to provide lessons learned. They on the West Coast will be looking into offshore wind, floating offshore wind, just like we will be in the Gulf of Maine. We discussed issues and opportunities from a fisheries perspective, offshore wind from a regulatory perspective. We had a panel discussion about compensation packages for offshore wind in the Northeast, what we've learned, where the best leverage points might be for our West Coast cohorts, and then traditional port uses and offshore wind, specifically as it applies to floating offshore wind needs. And those are my updates for today, and I can take any questions you might have.
Questions for Brad?
Not seeing any hands raised, Mr. Chair. I'll put the agenda back up.
Thank you, Brad, for your presentation. Okay, so we're gonna move along here to other business and public comment. Do you want to take public comment prior to convening law enforcement focus group? Jared?
I can do this really quickly, if you don't mind. So annually,
Okay,
we put
fine.
together the law enforcement focus group of the commission, usually around early to mid-November, to discuss enforcement and compliance challenges from the prior year and see if we need any regulatory tweaks to consider before wintertime rulemaking. The current members of that committee are yourself, Mr. Chair, Bill Doyle, and Shelley Edmondson. Khalil was previously a member, but he's since retired from the commission, so there is an open seat if if another commission member wants to fill that. We don't need 4 people, but we're welcome to have 4 people. And I'd like to work to convene this group before our November commission meeting to discuss whatever issues that law enforcement or the commission wish to bring up. So I guess my question to you, Mr. Chair, is should we add another person to this body, and should I work to convene this body?
Well, I think you're asking commission members, and we have a quorum, we're at full membership today. Does anybody want to volunteer for the 4th position?
I'm not seeing any volunteers, so we'll stay with the 3 that we have. And would you like me to work to convene this public body, this focus group rather, before the
Yes, by
November
all
meeting?
means. By all.
Okay, will do. So we can move on to other business and public comment.
Okay, let's other business for upcoming meetings, members. Any suggestions, ideas?
Not seeing any hands raised, Mr. Chair. We can move to Chris McGuire.
Yeah,
Chris?
just to follow up on the conversation around the recreational research done by DMF, I'd love to see that included in a future meeting with either Ben or Micah or whoever.
Thank you, Chris. I'll work with Micah and Ben to find a good time for that. All right.
So we can move to public comment, Jared?
Sure. If there's any members of the public who wish to make a comment this morning, or I guess it's this afternoon now, you can use the raise hand function to create a queue, and I'll call on you as they come up. I'm not seeing any hands raised, Mr. Chair. We can move to adjournment.
Okay, I need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Who's that, Bill?
Bill
Lamb?
Amaru.
Thank you, Bill.
I can second it, Ray.
Thank you, Shelley. Anybody opposed?
No opposition.
This meeting is adjourned.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Hopefully we'll see some of you up at Fish Day, and if not there, maybe you can watch Ben Gahagan and Micah Dean's presentation at 3 o'clock. Thank you all.